Welcome everybody. I'll now call tonight's meeting, August 15th of 2022 to order. Mayor McNeil-Smith has asked that I chair today's council meeting as he's having a minor health issue with his voice, and I'm acting mayor as needed in August. The mayor is participating via Zoom this evening. You'll see the rest of the council in chambers. We are still running hybrid meetings for the public as well. The public is now, of course, welcome to attend in person. Masks are optional, and people are still welcome to attend online if you register in advance. I will start with the territorial acknowledgement. We are currently on the territories of the Wasanich people who have been stewards of this land for thousands of years, and we'd like to keep that in mind as we make our decisions in the spirit of reconciliation and cooperation as we move forward. I'll move on to approval of the agenda with two amendments. We have two late items of correspondence with item 6A, and there will be a verbal council report from me. Can I get, can we have a recommendation as amended? Does yours not work? Sorry. Did I press the wrong button?
I'll move that the agenda be approved as amended.
Second.
Okay. There we go. Call the question. All in favor? Okay, that's unanimous. Motion approved as amended. Now we're moving on to the public participation opportunities. I see there are a lot of members of the public here tonight. So I'll say we have two public participation opportunities. The first one is general public participation. For that we have 20 minutes. You can speak to any item on the agenda, 4 minutes per person. Please be brief to make sure if there are a lot of people who'd like to speak, they have enough time. If you are speaking specifically to our item 4B1, Development Variance Permit Application for 98897 7th Street to relax the requirements for the heat pump location, that will have its own public participation opportunity. So you can hold your comments for when that one is on the agenda. So that being said, I'll open the floor up to anyone who'd like to speak to something on the agenda. Calling once. Oh, yeah, you can come up and speak. Can we do that? Yeah. Yeah, up to the podium, please. And there's a button on the mic. You'll see if your microphone is on, it will turn red.
Okay, so we're here representing Ocean Pier Medical Center. We've had parking paid for by all of our owners for the last 11 years for me. I travel from Victoria, as does Dr. Perks, and we just heard that as of September 1st, we're basically finding parking on the street, have to walk from the Mary Winspear, which in the summer is great, but in the winter and the pouring rain, some of our MOAs walk, some don't, so we're just, and as well as doctors. I don't expect our doctors to walk in the pouring rain from Mary Winspear all the way down to the other end of town. So I guess no one's come up with any other alternative. We've heard some rumors. One of the things we came up with as a group is, why can't we have so many reserved parking spots for the people that do work down there, and the rest of it be 3-hour free parking for, residents and tourists. Or, in the winter time, if we know we can park at Mary Winspear, we know that's an option, and we do thank you for that. However, if there was a shuttle that ran every 15 minutes in the winter just to run the working people back and forth, it would only have to be probably 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours at the end of the day. I just think there are other options rather than telling us, sorry, you guys are all out of parking. It's just, I don't think it's fair to all of a sudden just get a letter saying, I'm sorry, we're now taking over your parking lot that you've had for, Michelle's had it for 12 years. I've had it for 11. I drive from Victoria. I really don't want to spend an extra hour out of my day roaming around the city and then having to leave the patients to come out and move my car every 2 hours. So all we're asking is that you please think about it. Maybe we can come up with some other solution that works for both of us. Thank you.
Okay, I'll call a second time. Anybody else who would like to speak? And a third time, seeing no additional speakers, I'll call public participation period to a close and move on to section 4B, the special public participation for development variance permit application number DB 100320. And if anyone would like to come forward and speak to that, they may do so now. Yeah, come forward.
I hope I heard you correctly, and this is the B1, the 9889, yeah. Okay, so I've been here before in front of you, and I am Jean Ives, and I'm the president of the Strata Corporation there. I understand that some questions have been submitted. I'd just like to review again our situation. And I understand that there's been a lot of change in Sydney over the last few years, and people who've been in the neighborhood for a while are probably anxious, wondering what might be coming next and worried about change. I also understand that old-style cube heat pumps have a bad reputation for noise. And you understand that that's not the style that we're intending or hoping that we're able to get. I'd like to applaud Sydney for its extensive engagement of public, for these opportunities for people to speak. It's an extra step in your process that people do appreciate. You know that we have gas-fired furnaces. Everybody knows that people are moving away from gas. We don't have cooling units in our homes, and some of the bedrooms in the homes don't have vented windows. So that makes a cooling system a bit of a priority for us. One of the suggestions that I've heard from the planning department when he called today was a possibility of relocating the units, one to the roof. That was one suggestion. Obviously, the plan for people, or the hope for people, is to replace the furnace itself, which is in the crawl space, and to tap into the existing ductwork. So to put a unit on the roof and then come down to the crawl space from there to hook into the ducting is not a practical solution, and will leave an unsightly amount of piping on the outside of the building. The other suggestion that was made apparently was to put the units on the inside, facing the laneway. And we understand from Richard Roy from the beginning that would not be an acceptable option because it's too visible. So we're left with the back lanes as the only option to, at least that's what we think is the only option to go forward with this. I've said to you, I've already told you that 3 people have already done the energy audit, hoping to get this project underway if it's approved. And there are 4 other people who are interested in it but are waiting on this decision. We realize you've got so many different perspectives to take into consideration. Ours is just one, and we really do appreciate your consideration of it. Thank you.
I'll call a second time. Oh,
Good evening, Your Worship and Councillors. I'm David Stewart, and I'm here as President of Strata 9877 on 7th Street, which is located on the south side of the strata that we're talking about at the moment. Specifically, we're objecting to the proposed decrease in setback for the 4 heat pumps along the south boundary and adjacent to our strata. So it's not all the other heat pumps which have been talked about. It's just the 4 at this end on the south side. On our side of the boundary, we have a 3-metre strip of land used for social and gardening activities for our 2 stratas. And above them, right above them, are the 2nd floor bedrooms with windows overlooking the fence. The boundary fence was built at minimum cost and will not provide any significant attenuation of the sound. And so we're going to be exposed to an unacceptable 24 hours a day noise level 50 decibels or more. Way back in 2021, Sydney development staff recommended a reduction in the boundary setback for another location to 1.7 metres for a heat pump condenser, specifically because there were no dwellings adjacent to the property. So there was a recognition at that time that only because there was no other properties on that boundary, they could put this heat pump in. And it's not the case with us. You know, we've got people living right against the fence on both sides. In our case, we've got what they're recommending is a reduction of the heat pump setback, so the condensers are going to be right up against the fence, a metre from the fence, which is pretty unacceptable. Heat pump contractors advise against locating condensers near a boundary. If you go any heat pump contractor, they'll say that's a no-no, and especially near a window of a neighbour, and most of all, if there's a bedroom next door. And so we're going to be faced with, in the summer, next door in the strata, they've closed all their windows, they've got the heat pumps running, all the noise is there. On our side, we're going to have our windows open because we want to get cooling from a breeze going through, and we're going to have all the noise. And we just feel that that's a totally unacceptable arrangement. So, as far as we're concerned, this variance violates all the acceptable heat pump practices and should be rejected. There are other alternatives, and we've mentioned some of them, and maybe we need to talk about that, but right now what's been proposed is very unacceptable. Thank you.
Thank you. I will call again if there are any additional speakers for public participation. Yeah, come forward, please.
My name is Jim Griffith. I live at 9889 7th Avenue. I happen to be one of the people who approached the various suppliers of heat pumps. The three I approached recommended the location of the heat pumps. They gave us the decimal reading, which was less than the furnace reading, which I think you've stated in your letter. In all three cases, the heat pumps that we, myself and another person, went to listen to were quieter than our dishwasher. And that was basically the rationale for trying to go to this particular kind of heat pump. And because on both sides of our strata, in fact, on one side, there's two double garages before you even come close to a house. There are 6 units in that strata. And on the other side, there are 3 buildings. And the closest those buildings are to the fence are over 12 feet. So I have real difficulty when I listen to the noise factor of the heat pumps that you purchase today being detrimental as far as noise goes. And especially when I said all 3 people who looked at the installation recommended where they go.
All right, thank you. I will call again to see if there is anybody else who'd like to speak. Come on forward.
Good evening.
Turn on the microphone. There's just a button. Perfect.
Good evening. My name is Deb Eagleson Pepper, and I am also an owner and resident of 9889 7th Street. I don't have the technical expertise that Jim Griffiths has, and I've not done the same research that would be required if I were seeking to purchase a heat pump at this time for our home. Nor do I have Jean's extensive research into it as our Strata Corporation president. But I did want to make a couple of mentions of what it's like to live in this very lovely strata corporation that is organized and operated with extreme professionalism, the best I've ever seen in the 3 condo corporations in which I've lived over the years. But I want to just point out something that I think is basic. Some of our owners have many street-facing windows, particularly on the west side, and it's very, very warm. During the hot days, and particularly during heat domes, it's unhealthy to live in that kind of heat, and unsafe in some respects if you need to leave all your doors and windows open to get the cool of the wee hours of the morning, to cool your home down, only to close it up the next day to try and maintain some of that coolness. So I think it's a health issue. I think it's a human issue. And I also think, with due respect to Mr. Stewart, our neighbor, our valued neighbor, that heat pumps are going to be more and more desired as time goes on, especially as our climate changes. And it may very well be that their strata may be looking for heat pumps as well. And I ask that we take a look at this as within a community mindset, that if we can overcome the noise issues, and Mr. Griffiths has pointed out that that has been achieved, why not let those who need now, for the reasons that they need them, opening the door for the rest of us to go down that route, if and when it is desirable for us, and to create that cooperation over the fence for both of our stratas, and even at some point perhaps our neighbors on the other side of the other fences. So I would ask you to consider all the expertise that our strata corporation has brought to this, and make the best decision, which I believe is to approve. Thank you.
Thank you. Call for if there are any additional speakers. The special public participation. Okay. Seeing none, I'll call special public participation to a close. For 4C, public hearings, we have none. So I will move on to 4D, our presentations. We do have a presentation on the agenda. I do not see our, we have a presentation being loaded up here. And I will ask Mr. Peeraboo, he's in the room, to come forward.
I think he just texted me and said he had some technical.
He's having, okay, so he's supposed to be zooming.
But I don't mind speaking to him.
Absolutely.
Things moving forward. Good evening, Council. I'm Dallas, the developer at 5th and Malaview. We've added these pictures since the last presentation, just showing what is currently there now and what we're proposing to do there. You can see there's one boulevard tree, and I think we'll end up with 11 boulevard trees with this project. We haven't changed any of the design because we feel that this project is just, with the size of the lot, the way it sits there in the street, that all the buildings and the way that it's situated, it just complements that property as best as possible. Our design, which keeps the larger setback along the east side rather than the south edge, provides patio spaces and breathing room between the townhome project east of us, which is like really close to the property line there. So having that setback there is much more complementary to what's already existing. We also understand from the town staff that the design scores really highly with the new OCP design guidelines. And we are very aware of the town's, priority and keeping the canopy. We worked extensively on the landscape plan. And I think we end up with the one existing boulevard tree, a total of 21 trees over the whole project, where there are only currently 7 trees now. I'm joined here today with an arborist who I would like to come forward and just speak to those trees and answer any questions that you may have. To sum it up, we feel that the current design is the best arrangement and best use of this land. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Rudd. If any of my fellow councillors have questions,
Oh yeah, sure. Do you have any questions for me?
Councillor Garnett?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Rudd. Just one question, two-pronged. Was there any consideration given to developing the site with the retention of the protected trees? And if not, why?
There absolutely was, and knowing how council and the town, feels about the trees, we did everything possibly we could in order to make it work with those trees. But the more we looked at it and the way the buildings fit on that property, it would just begin to change the whole dynamic of that site, and then it would be unfeasible. Like, there's no way that we could even make it in a way that we could continue to even do an off or a development there that would, that you'd be able to, have any money to be made at the end of the day, right? With the elimination, the land costs, and just didn't work, right? Those trees, I believe the drip line is 25 feet, right? So it considerably comes into that site. And to try and save those trees, even with the yard setback there now, it would still impact those trees.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Getting away from trees for a moment, just on another aspect. So I'm pleased to see that you're doing adaptable units. And I wonder, when you sell, when you go to market those units, do you market them as an adaptable, or how do people maybe who have a disability, who have a walker or a wheelchair that would require that kind of space, do they, is that sort of put out there as a, so that they know that, hey, there's some adaptable units here, or they just market it as regular sort of units?
I work with Michelle Holmes Realty, and so they're very familiar. They've been in Sydney for decades. They're always working with the elderly, and they definitely will have those discussions with people that are in need, and have asked me questions about how to accommodate and what would be involved if I were to be involved in making modifications to actually install the elevators and do all of the necessary things to make it accessible for them if they need be, if it's necessary for a purchaser to buy those units.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Anybody have additional questions? No? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Rudd. We will be having a discussion and recommendation later on in the agenda.
Well, I was going to have the arborist come forward.
Oh, the arborist, I'm sorry.
And speak to the trees, if that'd be okay.
Yep, come on.
Okay.
You did say that, I forgot.
Yeah, that's okay. Mike Butcher.
And I can't see Mayor McNeil Smith, so I'm going to assume if he has a question here, he can override, but.
Is there, how do you?
Oh, there he is.
I wanted to just get down to the site plan here, so you can see the buildings and stuff. Do you know how to scroll? Like I'm hitting arrow, right? You just want to go to the next page. There you go. Yes. No, the site plan is good.
Oh, hi, my name's Mike Butcher, so I'm the arborist that's been retained by Dallas Rudd. So you know, I'll just talk a little bit more, and I know your question, Mr. Garnett, was very valid. The cedars that we're talking about that could be possibly retained if he was to move it back, and I know right now it's 1 meter back. If we were even to go 3.5 meters back, these cedar trees average about 50 centimeters in diameter, which would give them a 10-meter protected root zone on either side of the stem. So no matter how he was to design it, because of their western cedars and because of what's going on, I think the impacts would be so extensive that even if he did build, you would lose the trees down the road. It would be non-sustainable. I think under the current plan, with the landscape plan that he has and with the internal plans to do the greenery in the public boulevard, I think it's much more sustainable and it'll work. If you go down the road more towards downtown, you'll see that there's some other condos that have planted these purple leaf plums and some of these smaller boulevard trees. The other day when I was there, I snapped pictures, I have them on my phone. Almost the entire front boulevard area with the back lawn to the buildings was shaded because of how they're set and because of where the sun's setting in the western to the west. He's also incorporated some other large trees, which would be really great. I know I've got him putting in an Italian oak, which would be awesome. It's going to be a great tree, and it'll have a great crown spread. The largest tree there is the fir, and the fir can't be retained because of where it is. It's approximately in this area right here. There's no way. So under the current plan, there's no way the trees can be retained. Under a plan to push it back from the south to create more of a buffer or a green area, you're still losing the largest tree, the Doug fir. And in my professional opinion, the cedars would die within 5 to 10 years because of the impacts. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I see
Sorry,
Councillor McNeil Smith actually, I think may have
Oh,
been,
sorry,
and then,
go ahead.
I'll see Councillor Fallon.
Thank you, Chair. My questions through to the proponents are, on the site map, it indicates the units on the, with the backyard areas on the east side are interlocking brick, and they are some 15 feet between the building and the property line. What would be the width of those units, please?
The widths of each townhome?
Yeah, I gather they're similar. I guess I'm referring to Block D and Block C, how wide those units are.
They're approximately 33 feet.
Thank you. My question is, with them being approximately 30 plus feet wide and 15 feet deep, was right now it shows they're being all interlocking except for a very thin green strip on the property line. Was any consideration given to trees in those larger footprints within those properties?
We are
In the
putting
landscaping?
some small variety of trees in those garden beds there along the property line. And those garden beds are about 3 feet wide, all the way down the property line, so that's a decent size garden bed there.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Fallon, go ahead.
Thank you. This is not specifically to this project, but in generality, what we're seeing is developments come forward, and there's always the rationale why trees on the existing lot have to come down. And for you as an arborist, do you see ways that the municipality can somehow retain the existing large trees within developments? Like, how do we do this? Because each time an applicant comes forward, it's always a very similar story that in order to make the project work economically, we have to have this much coverage. Right. And if we have this coverage, then the trees have to come down. And I'm really struggling with how do we then create
we just had a previous speaker talking about heat buildup in their units and now having to go to mechanical cooling. How do we make this work?
Well, it's a pretty fine line. I've dealt with tree bylaws for the last 30 years, you know, with hundreds of different municipalities, but you know, a bylaw is a double-edged sword that's created, and the town of Sydney's bylaw is a good bylaw, but at the end of the day, you do allow development. And within that development, there's parameters that the applicant is allowed to choose or utilize within that land. So if your bylaw was so stringent that you wouldn't allow the removal of protected size trees, then you would get no development. Unless you're creating covenants everywhere that protects that piece of ground or that piece of soil for those trees. I think the number one thing that the town of Sydney should be looking at is sustainability down the long run and promoting good tree planting and renewable practices with trees. And that comes hand in hand with development.
Okay, so I get the part about the sustainability, and I don't want to get caught up into this. There's a whole other discussion going. My concern is it's one thing to put a tree in a park someplace so that we are replacing like for like, but how do we keep the trees in the residential area, in the area where people are sitting and playing and living?
Well, I think you're doing a good job. Your bylaw does. Your bylaw's pretty tight for protecting trees. Okay. It's just that your bylaw permits development. You want development. You need development. And with development, you will have to make choices. And unfortunately, some of those choices will be the existing vegetation.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Councillor Garnett?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Butcher. You mentioned choices. I know you're not an architect, you're not a developer, but the reality is those trees could be retained if this development was designed in a different manner.
I think that every development that occurs in the town of Sydney, any tree can be retained if it's designed differently. Mm-hmm. But I don't see that. So why is it going to stop here? Why is it going to be this one? Why hasn't it been the other ones? Can I bring up a good example?
Feel free. Sure.
Internally on the parks, you removed a certain number of trees to put a sidewalk in one of your parks. When the sidewalk could have been put on the berm, and you could have planted trees below the berm, in between the berm and the road, and then that would enhance shade on the sidewalk and would have shaded part of the road, which is kudo good, but the sidewalk was put under the trees. And that was a decision made by your Parks Department to list the park. So it's all about choices, and that was the choice your department made.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. Thank you. If you have
Okay.
nothing more to add about this
Thank you.
development application? Mr. Ed, go ahead, sorry. Yeah, yes, please. To the microphone, then everyone online can hear you.
Yeah, I just wanted
Please turn your microphone on.
Sorry.
Yeah.
No, I just wanted to, he talked about sustainability and development and having to make choices, and I wanted to reference again that we're going to end up with, like I said, there are currently 7 trees now, and there will be 21 trees on that property while creating the much needed family housing that we have. Someone had made comment on our first presentation that, well, we don't really know if it's family housing. Well, these are very similar to what I've done previously, and in phase 1 we had a total of 7 doors, and 4 out of the 7 are families with 2 kids in each family. One family's about to give birth to their first child in these homes, and so 4 out of 7, I think, is over 50% are families moving into this type of scenario. So, and if you looked at the report too, his report, the tree report, I think we're 1/3, we're increasing, like 30 square meters of increased shade. And you only have one tree giving shade there on the corner. Now we're going to be wrapping all that. I think it's like almost 300 feet of 7-foot wide sidewalk, which we'll be wrapping around with boulevard trees and on-property trees to create shade for pedestrians in that area where there's currently none. So that's all.
Thank you, Mr. Rudd. We
Thanks.
always have interesting discussions when we bring up trees, don't we?
We did.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Are there any further there is no further questions from the rest of council. I will move on to section 5, so we will have our discussion and recommendations about that application later on in the agenda. So we have 5 bylaws on the agenda. For the benefit of the public, we are just doing final approvals of these bylaws tonight. We've discussed each of these bylaws at previous council meetings, and so tonight we're just doing the motions to adopt each bylaw. So I will move to 5A, bylaw number 2229, Beacon Avenue West Roundabout temporary borrowing, and there is a recommendation.
I'll move adoption of the Beacon Avenue West Roundabout temporary borrowing bylaw 2229.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Councillor Garnett.
You
have a comment?
To ask if they want to talk first. I just have a question, thank you, Chair, through to staff. The $2 million that we're authorizing for borrowing, do we have any indication of when we might be accessing these funds?
We won't be accessing the 2 million until the end of the project. That's why this particular bylaw is in place for interim funding until that happens.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any further questions for staff? Councillor O'Keefe, you have,
Thank you, and it's only, it actually relates to something later in the agenda where we're talking about the Beacon Roundabout and the possible cost overruns. And I think it's recommended in the report that we would dip into the Canada whatever benefit. And so I'm wondering, like, we initially talked about tapping into other reserve funds when we talked about the cost for this project. And so my question I was gonna ask later in the agenda is related to this, because if we do have to use that 560,000 for a cost overrun, I'm wondering what might be at risk in terms of other projects. And so that's why I'm wondering, should we be thinking about borrowing more than 2 million to cover cost overrun?
Through the chair, I would not recommend borrowing more. We have the capacity in the reserve in question, and nothing will be canceled. It just means less will be available for future projects.
Okay, thank you.
thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, I will call the question. All in favor? Okay, I see 6 in favor. All those opposed? Councillor Garnett opposed. Okay, the motion carries. Bylaw, next is section 5B, and there's a recommendation.
I'll move that bylaw number 2235 be adopted.
Okay, it's moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Councillor O'Keefe, did you wish to speak? Your microphone's still on. Okay. I will call the question then. All in favor? Okay, that's unanimous. Bylaw adopted. 5C, bylaw number 2236. There's a recommendation. I'll look for a motion.
I'll move adoption of bylaw number 2236.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Mover, seconder, wish to speak? No. Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor? Okay, that's unanimous. It's approved. We're on 5. Oh my goodness, I've lost track. We just did C, didn't we? 5D, bylaw number 2237, the emergency program. And there's a recommendation. You're moving, Councillor?
Yes, I'll move adoption of bylaw number 2237, emergency program.
Second.
Second, moved and seconded. Any discussion? Comments from the first mover and seconder? Call the question. All in favor? And that's unanimous. 5E, bylaw number 2239, and I'll look for a motion.
I'll move the bylaw be adopted for number 2239.
Second.
Okay, it's moved and seconded. Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, I will call the question. All in favor? Okay, it's unanimous, and we are done with the bylaws. We'll now move on to section 6, development permits and development variance permits, with section 6A, development variance permit application number DV100320, 9889 7th Street, which is to relax requirements for heat pump locations in order to allow installation of heat pumps at an existing multi-unit townhouse development. And we had two late item pieces of correspondence to go with that. I will open the floor. Oh, sorry, I will call and see if staff have any comments. No? All right, then I will open the floor to councillors for discussion. Councillor Wainwright.
I'll put a motion on the floor for discussion. I'll move that the application be approved.
Second.
Okay, we have it moved and seconded. Is there any discussion?
Yeah, so, speaking to it, this is obviously challenging where you have two sets of neighbors that disagree over an item like this. I have heat pumps personally, and they do not run constantly throughout the day. I grant that they do run, periodically, and they make the noise that they make, but modern heat pumps are quite a bit quieter than the cube ones that were discussed previously. They're quite a bit quieter than heat pumps even from 10 years ago. Granted, it's important that you buy a low noise model, otherwise it's not that quiet, but there are ones that are approximately 40 decibel, which is less than a typical conversation that people might be having outside. Yes, if that came on at 3 a.m. and you had your window open, it would be as annoying as a conversation going on outside your window. But I don't think that it is unreasonable. The question is, what's a reasonable alternative? The nature of the structure, if they have units that have windows that do not open, that really limits the options for types of air conditioning or other alternatives, because you need ventilation. So there would be probably quite a lot of challenges in alternatives to heat pumps. This is one of those where there is no perfect solution, but I think this strata does need to put in some cooling, and that heat pumps are the most efficient way of doing it and the quietest way of doing it. If it's possible for them to locate it in a manner that could reduce the noise, great. Other than that, the best I could suggest is to strongly encourage the strata to get the quietest units they can find. At any rate, like I say, it's a challenge in a situation like this, but I do think it's a reasonable request.
Thank you. The seconder?
Thank you. I will concur with what my colleague has just said. I believe that having to retrofit something creates more challenges than designing it in the first place. But I think the options that are being presented here are reasonable. I also have experience with heat pumps, and I have to say they are not obtrusive. there's, there's a lot of difference from what they were. So I don't have any issue with supporting this. I know it's perhaps not the perfect thing to do, but I think it's the right thing to do. And I think this, from what I've gathered, from what I've heard from this strata, they have done their due diligence, and they will continue to do their due diligence to make sure that they can mitigate as much as possible while still meeting their very rightful needs. And I'm happy to support this motion. Thank you.
Councillor Garnett, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I understand both sides of the equation here. I was really surprised to find out that, given how new the building is, that they weren't installed to begin with. It's perplexing. It also speaks to part of the reason why we shouldn't build to zero lot line. These issues wouldn't be an issue if there was more of a setback with the building to begin with. Having said that, there's a quality of life here, and if your home is so hot that you can't even be in it, and weird word to the wise, I grew up in a trailer in the Okanagan, so I know what overbearing heat is. So I understand completely where you're coming from and how difficult and challenging it is. I myself have a multi-unit heat pump in my home, and they're very, very quiet if you get the right one, for sure. And I have every confidence that your strata will do that based on what I've heard here tonight. And I just think that although I understand the concerns of the neighbors, this is the direction we're going. We want people to get off of fossil fuels and onto more, climate-friendly energy sources. And if this can provide these people with the ability to be in their homes in the summer, unfortunately, it wasn't built that way, but that's not their fault. So I'm more than happy to approve this tonight. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Mayor McNeil Smith first, and then Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Chair. I'll begin with a couple of questions through you to staff. And that is, Mr. Stewart, one of the speakers this evening, and who provided a letter of correspondence, made reference to 3 other municipalities having a noise as part of their noise bylaw, a decibel level of 45 dBA between certain times or any time. I understand. Could staff confirm that we do not have such a, or do we have such a provision in our bylaws?
Through the chair to Mayor McNeil Smith. Ms. Clary, would you like to take that one?
Sure. Good evening. No, the town does not have decibel reading levels in our bylaws.
Okay, thank you. I guess my concern is that while we would have an expectation of the proponent and they have an interest in seeking the quietest unit, we don't have a restriction in place, and quite frankly, the neighbor who's concerned doesn't know for sure what in fact will come to be. A second question through to staff is, one of the presenters made reference to a staff comment during the application process that heat pumps in the interior drive aisle area would be unsightly. Can staff comment on the practicality? Is it, apart from sightliness, is there any feasible reasons, technical wise, why the units couldn't be in the center aisle?
Through the chair to Mayor McNeil Smith. So my understanding with heat pumps is that they need to be within a certain distance of the, for example, the forced air mechanism that they're providing the coolant to. But in terms of from a bylaw perspective or from a aesthetic perspective, there's nothing restricting heat pumps from being on the interior side. There are options to mitigate in terms of screening or something like that. So it's possible, but I'm not sure if it's technically possible from a installation standpoint.
Thank you to staff through the chair. I guess the comment is that, and I know it was spoken to earlier by one of the speakers about location on the roof, and I wouldn't suggest that for technical reasons or practicality reasons. But if it hasn't yet been explored, the feasibility of these units technically being able to be located in the drive aisle, and that option ruled out for technical reasons, it's not close enough to the existing forced air furnaces, whatever, then I would feel more comfortable giving final consideration to this. I do have a concern with the noise level. Heat pumps don't operate continuously over 24 hours, as we've heard, but they do go off and on over 24 hours, particularly with weather that we've experienced through this summer. And if it's a situation where they're not at the appropriate level, and given they don't have the recommended setback from adjacent properties, that's a concern. We do have stratas on the south side. One strata has come forward. We haven't heard from the other. On the north side, we have two single-family residences. One has written in with no concerns. However, those properties are zoned multifamily, and could it be sometime in the future where you have a similar strata to these two that are currently adjacent to each other, and heat pump is a future concern. So my preference, unless staff can provide further information at this point, would be to refer it back to staff for that consideration. I'll end my comments there, Chair, and listen to colleagues.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Chair. I similarly have concerns with this. While I'm very sympathetic to the applicants, and that heat is definitely concerned, I'm also very sympathetic to the neighbors. And yes, it's not the fault of the applicants that their developer didn't provide a heat pump and didn't think of this. However, it's also not the fault of the neighbors next door. And while we talk about, there's a need to improve their quality of life in terms of the heat, there's no question that there's a need for that. But what I'm concerned about is that whilst we improve the quality of life for the applicants, we're declining the quality of life for their neighbors. And so I'm not comfortable with that sort of exchange. In terms of heat pumps, and this is the way we're going, and we should support this, well, that's absolutely true. And if we're committed to that, that's something that we should have in our zoning bylaw and our OCP. And we should have guidelines like other municipalities do that regulate the sound ratings for these. So those are things that are a concern for me. I'd like to see other options looked into before we do this. If it was something that, we could approve conditionally, that would be fine. But it's not, so if we say, let's try it out, these people are going to invest a lot of money in this, and if then the neighbors come back and we do sound testing and they say it's really too loud, well, it's too late by then. So because there's such an impact on the neighbors, I'm concerned about approving it as it is at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to Councillor Rentoul. I saw Councillor Wainwright earlier would wish to speak for a second time. So Councillor Rentoul, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. The challenge has been noted that we're seeing fairly new developments without suitable cooling, and this is something that needs to be addressed and I think looked at critically when applications come before the Advisory Planning Commission. It's going to be incumbent on the town to start looking at ensuring these new development projects are equipping residents for climate and climate change. So I'm sympathetic certainly for the application that's before us, but I was also surprised to hear the statement, as the mayor noted, that there had been insight from staff that likely facing the inside laneway may not be feasible for aesthetic reasons, I think is the statement in the presentation. I too would like to see that addressed. There's also a note here in the letter from Mr. Stewart suggesting that the common area between the two strata rows, may be another option. I'd like to have staff comment on that. So if I could ask staff, because there was again a note that staff had spoken with the strata president with regard to some of the items I think that came forward in Mr. Stewart's letter. So I'll turn to staff to see if there was any discussion with the applicant with respect to the common area between the two strata rows. Or is that referred to the same laneway comment that the mayor pursued?
Through the chair to Councillor Rintoul, I did have a brief conversation with the strata president of the applicant's property today, and just to clarify whether or not the discussions had been had around the potential for installation elsewhere on the property. From that conversation, it wasn't particularly clear to me to what level that has been investigated, and unfortunately I'm not aware of any conversations that other planning staff have had previously earlier in the summer on this one.
Okay. So thank you. I think I'm inclined to be more comfortable to see a recommendation that would include a specific reference to the maximum decibel that we would like to see on any heat pump operating within a variance within that 1 meter range, certainly. So I'll listen to my colleagues further, but if the mayor had a motion arising with respect to this being referred back to staff, it doesn't end this process here. It just sees a little further exploration around the avenue of the inside laneway that was raised during the presentations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think before going to Council Wainwright and then Mayor McNeil-Smith, I will speak myself for a first time. I had exactly the same questions as the mayor's already brought up and Councillor Rintoul has already discussed. And to my recollection, the statement about it would be too visible in the interior drive aisle. So question to staff, is that part of our bylaw? I'm thinking of, and I wish I had thought of this earlier and I could have looked it up directly. Regarding siting, I know earlier when I looked at getting a heat pump on my own property, there are places that were ruled out because of the visibility from other lots. And so I'm wondering if this is what came up that is actually something in our bylaw, and if that would be a more appropriate variance to seek if that was technically feasible. I don't know which person on staff would know what part of the bylaw might be restricting that.
So, Madam Chair, the relevant section of the zoning bylaw related to heat pumps, I'll just read it out. When placed at grade or wall-mounted, heat pumps and central air conditioning units shall only be located in the rear yard or interior side yard, to not be closer than 3 meters to any lot line. B, heat pumps located on the roof of a building shall be screened from view of adjacent properties and the street by the roof structure or parapet walls. I would interpret these sections of the bylaws to allow heat pumps in this location. I mean, this bylaw is generally written from the idea that the building is in the center of the lot, and it's not two buildings with a driveway between it like this situation is. But generally, the intent of this section is to keep the heat pumps away from the adjoining lot lines. In this case, I think that meets the intent of the bylaw if they were on the interior side of the two buildings.
Thank you, and that seems to be it, that we're seeking a variance to keep it in the rear yard, which kind of overrides what the point of having that section of the bylaw was in the first place, whereas we could take some of the problem of having it in that section and by moving it into the more visible place in the middle. And I guess to Councillor Rintoul's point about he would feel more comfortable if there was a motion that required that decibel level stay, that the other municipalities have, and I would feel more comfortable with that as well if that's something people are in favor of. So I will go to Councillor Wainwright next, and then Mayor McNeil-Smith after that.
Thank you, Chair. given the discussion, I think it would be appropriate for us to table this application to allow staff to look into the technical feasibility of alternative locations. And I'm thinking specifically the drive aisle. And because that seems to really be the key question. I think if it is feasible to install the heat pumps in a location that is farther away, if it needs a variance, if it needs screening, whatever, that may be a better solution. So allowing staff to look into the technical feasibility of that, and then we can make the decision when that's done. But I'll not make the motion right now. I'll let Mayor McNeil-Smith speak.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mayor McNeil-Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I do have a question through you to staff, and that is, I understand that through motions this evening, we could not impose a decibel level on the heat pumps for this applicant.
Through the chair to Mayor.
Go ahead, Corey.
Ventriloquist.
I suppose as a condition of the variance permit, a unit with a maximum decibel rating of X could be installed, approved for installation. I would say it's more challenging in the real world post-installation, to ensure that that it's exactly that number as the maximum, given that there might be conditions where it could exceed that. So I don't think it's something we'd recommend as part of the approval process.
Sorry, it's possible to make a recommendation on this applicant of a maximum level, or your staff is recommending not to do so?
If I can, through the chair, to Mayor McNeil-Smith, I think we're recommending at this point, Mr. Mayor, that this not take place. I think there's too many challenges, and in fact, I think putting a condition like this, I would want to get a legal opinion as well with respect to a condition on a variance.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. And Chair, I would like to procedurally, I believe we can move, while this motion is on the floor, I would like to make a motion to refer this to staff, which can be considered, as I understand, can be considered at this time by council, for staff to review the feasibility of locating the heat pumps in the interior area, and also look into a possible recommendation on a maximum sound level, if that's appropriate.
Okay, so procedurally, staff, do we have to table the existing motion and then go to the mayor's new motion, or?
Well, there's a motion on the floor.
The existing
so,
motion on the floor is
yeah.
to approve the existing variance, so.
I believe procedurally we can refer a motion that is open on the floor.
Does that work?
We only table motions to a later time in a meeting.
Second.
Okay. Councillor Fowler, did you have a question or a comment about the motion?
I had a question going back to the location on the interior drive aisle. I understood staff to have said that was technically not possible. Did I misunderstand that, or is that a correct understanding? Technically, I wasn't speaking aesthetically, technically.
Through the chair to Councillor Fallot, I guess I just clarify, was that at a previous meeting?
No, wasn't that this evening? Did we not say the words or hear I thought I heard the words that it was technically not feasible to place the condensers on the interior drive aisle?
I don't think we have that information. Staff do not have that information. The applicant might, I don't know. It didn't sound like it during my conversation today.
Okay.
Mayor McNeil Smith.
Yeah, just for clarification, through to Councillor Fallett. Yeah, so through a question that I did arise, I believe Mr. Newcomb did said it was unknown whether it could be a technical challenge, but it was unknown at this time.
That was my understanding as well. It was unknown. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. No, I'm just seeking clarification on procedurally what's happening now. So there's a motion on the floor that was moved and seconded. So is that just being set aside and that the motion to refer it to staff sort of overrides that? I just want to make sure when you call the question, I know what I'm voting on.
That's my understanding.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So if there's any further discussion. All right. So when I call the question, I will be calling the question on whether we refer this entire development permit variance application to staff for further investigation on using the interior drive aisle. And there was nothing in there about sound and being able to put limits. Oh, is there in the mayor's motion?
I guess I did ask, the second part was to ask staff to give consideration to possibly recommending a decibel level, a sound level. It may not be, we may not procedurally be able to do that, but staff will be able to tell us, I think, when this goes back.
All right, so thank you. So the motion will be to both investigate the technical feasibility of putting a heat pump in the drive aisle and whether or not we can put a condition on the variance to limit the decibel rating on something that is installed, but not on whether it can practically end up there. Councillor O'Keefe.
And just in regards to that, so we're asking staff to also find out if we can put a condition with decibels, but I would also want to know, and maybe they would bring that forth anyways, is what would be an appropriate decibel level? I mean, I know that there's mention of different municipalities have certain decibel levels, but if we said 40, does that work in this case, or is it dependent on how far away the unit is? So I guess a question through you to staff is that something that staff would look into, or do they need further direction on that as part of the motion?
Through the chair to Councillor O'Keefe, I think if we're including options such as looking at conditions related to maximum decibel levels, etc., we'll look at those particular options and bring that back for council's consideration. So essentially what we're doing is we're exploring alternatives to what is being proposed right now, including the siting of the particular unit. So
Okay.
we'll include that as part of it.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. I think we have Mayor McNeil Smith and then Councillor Rintoul.
Sorry, I meant to take my hand down, Chair.
Oh, you meant to take your hand down. Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Chair. I'll support the motion and hope it doesn't discourage those who are pursuing this. I think what's important here, because this will set somewhat of a precedent, we want to make sure and get it right, and addressing hopefully the maximum decibel as part of a new recommendation, I think would be helpful and build confidence for other stratas perhaps looking to do this in the future. So I think this is just taking a pause and making sure we get it right, and so I'll support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fallett.
Thank you. I think we're getting ourselves caught up in something here, talking about decibel levels. The industry is doing a whole lot of work because close lot lines, close accommodations with one unit to another is very common. And I think the industry is doing its part in the machines have a reasonably low sound. I don't hear a whole lot of people ever reading anything about oh gosh, I can't sit out on my patio because my neighbor's condenser is running. I really think we're getting caught up in something. I'm not willing to support this motion. I think the ask on the table to put these heat pumps in is a reasonable ask. I think there's reasonable mitigation being done in this particular case. And I do not believe that there is going to be a concern. And I think if we want to talk about decibel levels in the future, we should, but I think we should not make it part of this.
Thank you. I guess I will make my last comments, seeing no other speakers, before I call the question. I know our council frequently gets accused of taking a lot of time to discuss things, so we talk too much, but I think it's worth it. Councillor Fallot makes, a good point about how the industry is having to look at exactly these sorts of situations all the time, and obviously the industry and the building industry is very aware of this sort of thing. On the other hand, I think the points have been adequately raised that, the neighbors, everyone is being forced to live very close to each other, and this is a livability issue for the people who require the heat pumps, that if they don't have air conditioning in these units quickly become unlivable for portions of the year. On the other hand, if they really did get installed and they were very loud, and that would be an irreversible decision, as Councillor O'Keefe stated, it could very well make things fairly unlivable for their neighbors as well, and that would also not be fair. And this is it's a difficult situation for everyone to be in, and it's one that we need to put some thought into being able to solve. So I'm comfortable supporting the motion as it is. And I will call the question. All in favor? So I see 5 in favor. Those opposed? 2 opposed, Councillors Garnett and Councillor Fallot. The motion carries. I will move on to development application.
Chair,
Sorry.
Chair, I do have a motion arising,
Oh, go ahead.
if I might. I would like to move to request staff review the appropriate maximum sound requirement bylaw of maximum sound requirements for heat pumps in our bylaws, and bring that forward back to council. This is independent of the current application.
Second.
Okay, open for discussion. Oh, Mr. Hibble, go ahead.
If I can, through the chair to Mayor McNeil-Smith, just to confirm, that would be you indicated it would be independent, but it would also be based on a separate time frame, I would assume, as well.
Yes, of course,
Yeah.
when staff found it appropriate.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, any further discussion? Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor? Okay, I thought that was 5. All opposed? 2 opposed, Councillors Fallot and Councillor Garnett. That motion carries. Any further motions arising? Seeing none, I will move on to item 6B, Development Permit Application Number DP100835 and Development Variance Application Number DB100319 for 10145, 10147 5th Street and 2411 Malaview Avenue to relax the exterior side setback, rear setback, and number of stories in order to allow a 3-story, 12-unit, multi-unit residential townhouse development. And we have a recommendation. Go ahead, Councillor O'Keefe.
I'll move that the development permit application number DP100835 and development variance permit application number DV100319 for the properties at 2411 Malaview Avenue and 10147 to 10145 5th Street be forwarded to the Advisory Planning Commission for review and comment.
Second.
Thank you. I realized I probably should have asked staff if they wanted to comment on their report before we went ahead with our motion discussion. No? All right. So we have a motion on the floor. Any discussion? Yeah, go ahead for the mover.
Thank you. It's always disappointing to lose trees on a property, and that's the reality that we're going to live in. And the point made about we have choices to make about, we have a desperate need for housing, and we also don't want to lose trees. But, so it's a balancing act. I think in this case, I feel comfortable that what's proposed in terms of saving the trees is not feasible, it appears, in this case. I'm happy to see that there's going to be significant number of trees provided in place of those that are coming down, plus a lot more. So I'm happy to see this move to APC for their comment. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll look to the seconder. No? Councillor Garnett, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to begin my comments or preface my comments by saying that we as a council all agreed, each one of us voted yes in declaring a climate emergency. Now, we've heard the word balance used tonight, but from my perspective, we need to approach our development proposals with a balance of housing and green space and trees. And we're not doing that. By continually providing developments with zero lot lines and paving over and concreting over and building over, the green space will never come back in those sites. It's lost, probably forever. The trees, the protected trees, we've heard about how many trees they're going to plant in replacement. They don't provide the same benefit as the protected trees that are there. It will take decades to get to that point. I've spoken many times about what these trees do and what benefit they provide the community, the livability, quality of life. I've been reflecting on this a lot lately because of the constant heat warnings we've been getting and watching across the country and across Europe and everywhere else where everything's burning. But in our community, we've had heat wave after heat wave after heat wave this summer, and of course last year was worse. And I've been listening to environmentalists, I've been listening to urban planners, and they've all said the same thing. If you want to reduce heat in your cities, you need to making sure your tree canopy is increased. And number one, protect the ones you have. We need to do that. This is critically important for the future of our community. And this is just one development, and I get that. But we need to start thinking in more future and how our community is going to be livable in the future decades to come. Coming up now and in the future for our kids, our grandkids. The more developments like this that occur and the more trees that get eliminated in green space, the less livable our community is going to be. It's that simple. And the balance we need to strike is with retaining the green space and trees. And if we have to have a few less places to live, as critical as housing is, if we keep continually heating our communities with these developments, everybody's going to have to get in their car and air condition just to go get groceries because they aren't going to be able to go outside because it's not going to be physically safe. So I implore my fellow councillors, we need to start thinking long-term here with this. This is a climate emergency now, but it's not going away anytime soon. And the developments we approve have to have that mindset that what are we doing here? Like, how is this going to impact everything? And this kind of development moving forward, time after time after time, is going to heat our community. That's what it's going to do. Because these trees will take decades to replace the ones we're removing. So I will not support the recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Fallon?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Garnett. This evening we heard choices, and we heard other applications were approved, so why this one? So when do we say this far and no further? Europe right now is in the midst of their 3 major rivers have sunk to their lowest point. Their transportation is at risk. A month ago, I was in Vancouver on one of the extremely hot days, and I was driving through, and it was the streets that had trees, and where the houses at the properties, sorry, not the houses, where the properties had trees that were pleasant and were actually, oh my God, I get to stop my car in traffic in the shade. and I don't have to sit out in the 29-degree temperatures. And it's great that we are replacing trees, that the applicant is offering to do what the town is asking, to replace trees in public spaces and boulevard trees. But it is the trees on the property that matter. And here we have this evening a proponent coming forward saying we need to do something because we are dying in our houses because it's too hot. We have bedrooms that have non-opening windows, and we have no air conditioning in our homes. A neighbor comes and says, you can't put the heat pumps there because it might disturb my peace and quiet. We're building because we say we're building close together to zero lot lines because we say we have to do it for affordability, and then we're having to retrofit at extreme costs. And we're interfering with the quality of life. My God, what are we doing? I think we have to say stop at some point. And why is it that properties can only be developed if they get developed to their extreme edges and everything gets covered? I don't know if this is going to make a difference, but I'm not going to approve this application to move forward because I think it has to stop someplace, and this needs to be redesigned. Thank you.
Go ahead, Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to support this going to APC. I would like APC to have a hard look at the plans. The concern about trees is certainly a valid one, but when I look at the landscape plan for the site, they're putting in a lot of trees along the boulevard where there are none. So people walking along the sidewalk, people riding their bikes, that kind of thing, are going to get to enjoy the shade of those trees. Whereas the couple of very large trees well onto the property aren't going to provide the same kind of benefit for people going by. On the other hand, this isn't a final answer. APC gets to have a hard look at it. They can see what they can do with the design. But not even trying to approve the design and just saying no. If we really do want to have a lot more green space in the downtown, we should be thinking about lesser lot coverage. That's something that, we could have maybe thought of during the OCP. Certainly one can think about it during the zoning bylaw. But if a person has bought a property where the zoning bylaw gives certain rights, I think we have to be pretty careful to give reasonable and fair consideration to their application and not say, no, we're not even going to let our advisory committee review it. I don't think not allowing it to proceed is an appropriate kind of thing to do. I think the rationale for not allowing it to proceed sets an incredible precedent. It's certainly an election type precedent. Maybe we're coming to that time of year where people are actually making their statements more to do with their interest in the election campaign than making good decisions. I'll leave it at that.
Councillor Rintoul.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I appreciate the comments Councillor Garnett made. I love my trees at home, and my life would be a lot more challenging without the benefits that they offer. But I've got a home. There's people looking for homes, and you mentioned balance, and so that really comes into play. And I think developers hear these conversations, and they make changes to their practices, including around things like HVAC, heating and cooling, and that's what has to happen. This sort of evolution has to continue. But I'm most comfortable seeing this go to the Advisory Planning Commission to follow the process that we've got. And I would be under no illusion that this won't be a concern that the APC raises.
and addresses, and I'll certainly articulate, well, the conversation that's happened here and encourage people to listen to your comments, Councillor Garnett and Councillor Fallon, because I think they were important. But we do have a process that I'd like to see us move forward with, and I'm also, in keeping with Councillor Wainwright's comments, quite pleased with the trees that are being added, and recognize, as you do, that it's a renewable resource. It will take time to get to that canopy, but this is what we're asking developers to do. We're asking them to plant more trees, and this application is doing it in this particular development. So I'll leave my comments there, Chair.
Thank you. I see Councillor Garnett for a second time. However, I will speak for a first time to this motion. And I believe Mayor McNeil-Smith, did you raise your hand and I missed you before I said I would speak? Okay. I will let you speak first for the first time, then me, then Councillor Garnett for a second time.
Thank you, Chair. I'm really challenged because I hear both sides, and I'm going to start with the balance and livability side. I share the concerns expressed by colleagues. We went through an OCP process, and what we heard clearly from the community coming into this term and through the OCP process is that we need to find a better balance between our housing, our development, and the other things that we value, such as green space and tree canopy and so on. And I appreciate that the experienced developer, Mr. Rudd, and the very experienced Mr. Arborist are providing their experience and their expertise bringing this application forward. I'm going to repeat some of the remarks I made at the last meeting where I expressed concern. And that is, when you look at this site plan, it is the footprint of the buildings is below lot coverage, very acceptable. But because we are going from 3 residential units to 12 residential units, we have a rather significant drive aisle taking up a significant portion of the property between the 2 rows of units. And then on the east side of the property, which I referred to earlier this evening, we have a length of at least 180 feet, 6 units times 30 feet, by 15 feet with no trees, but interlocking brick. In the response to my question, yes, there will be a significant flower bed. I'm not sure if I'm using the right terminology, but there won't be trees on the property line with the property on the east side. I think consideration can be given in space that large, 33 by 15 on each of the lots, for trees, unless arborists or developers or staff come back and say that isn't practical for some reason. The other concern I have is when the clarification, it's unfortunate that we weren't aware of the 4.5 meter setback on the south side during our initial deliberations. But one of the options that has not been considered, and I appreciate colleagues who did pose the question to the proponent this evening, what other considerations were given when this detail was brought forward? Well, I do appreciate that it would be a challenge, and staff even comment in the report that the current trees may not be the appropriate trees given their species, given their size, and so forth. But one of the options that has not been considered is that, again, in 4.5 meters, 16 feet or whatever the conversion is, given the width of the property, consideration could have been given to plant the same great trees that the proponent is proposing to plant on the boulevard. And that consideration, there's no indication that that consideration was given, which is a concern to me. And if I'm interpreting the responses from the proponent this evening, it's a matter of economics, which is a concern. The third point I'll make is that while I do appreciate the landscaping plan and all the thought that has gone into the landscaping plan, the sidewalk is being shifted from approximately 2 feet from the curb to the curb. And in both the drawings on the cover of the proponent's plans, it shows 2 telephone poles in the middle of the sidewalk. I'm not going to put it forward to staff a question that, will that be dealt with? Can that be dealt with? But I just don't understand today, after the challenges we've had in our community, why that hasn't, why we're looking at drawings like that today with telephone poles in the center of sidewalks. And lastly is that while I appreciate 11 significant trees will appear on the boulevard, the staff have indicated in either the last report or this report or both that that's not a guarantee. We have boulevards for certain underground services in certain locations. So it's not a guarantee at this time that we can actually have all of those trees. And I have a concern that we're shifting the trees from sorry, when I was talking about the site coverage before, I was talking about the footprint of the buildings. I was talking about the interlocking brick in the yards, both on the east side, repeated again on the west side. Sorry, I was talking about the drive aisle, but I want to complete by talking about how much of the property is covered by either building footprint, driveway, or interlocking brick. But the proponent brings forward in the landscaping plan, well, we'll make use of the town boulevard to bring the tree canopy. Councilor Wainwright brings a very valid point forward in terms of the benefit to the community in terms of having it adjacent to the sidewalk for people who use the sidewalk. However, I have a concern that the balance hasn't been found on the existing property. And what I did make reference to is when you go down 5th Street from Malaview into town, into Sydney Avenue, or you go down that section of 4th, or you go down sections of 3rd, you see trees on the private property. There may be also boulevard trees, but there's trees on the private property. And that has all the benefits with regards to climate change that Councillor Garnett and others have spoken to, but also adds to the ambience and the character of our small town. And we're shifting from that, apparently significantly because of economics, to covering properties and putting as many trees on boulevards or in parks as we can. So I will listen to remaining colleagues. I said I would speak to both halves. The other half is process. I value the opinions and the deliberations and the experience that our Advisory Planning Commission has, and I would like to see them weigh in on this. But at the same time, I'm have my concerns in mind, and I'm not sure how I'm going to vote on this motion. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Now I'll take the opportunity to speak for the first time. I'm comfortable with this motion as well. Going forward to APC, they will be reviewing some of these aspects that the mayor has brought up regarding whether, I mean, technically the trees will be going along the boulevard. I know previously when applications have come forward and they didn't have boulevard trees, they stipulated it was because they already knew that there were facilities there underground. If this developer has already said that they would be putting trees along the boulevard there, I assume it's because they have looked into that and that there were not underground facilities in that location, and they actually intend to and are able to put trees there. I also believe, and the mayor had asked the question before about that 3-foot wide garden along the back lot, and I believe Mr. Rudd had said that there would be small trees planted in that 3-foot wide garden. I can see him, he's nodding in the in the back there. So they may not be large shade trees, but they were going to be small trees in that back garden. And so, as with Councillor Wainwright, I see the utility of actually having trees planted along the sidewalk. I know the developments along Bower Bank where they've planted those new trees, even though they're columnar maples, which are not, are trees that are meant to be in that small footprint. They already do cast quite a bit of shade, and they're definitely not decades old. When people plant these kind of fast-growing deciduous trees for these developments, they mature more quickly than the existing conifer species do. And that's why we use them in urban environments. I think it's important that while we are sending this forward and having, our committee look at this, is that they will be looking at the rationale, they will be looking at the bylaws. As Councillor Wainwright brought up, the question of these trees is not whether it's an emotional issue, it's whether by trying to say no to an application now, we are even following the process that we have as a town for developments, and how important it is to make sure that our process is still being followed. I understand the trees are an emotional issue, but we do need a rationale. And there is no rationale currently not to send them on to APC. And so I can't see a point not to do it. I understand the emotional issues are very charged, and I've brought it up every time we talk about conifers. The arborist who spoke earlier spoke about the red cedars. Red cedars have been dying for decades because of the droughts, because of the heat domes. He said they'd probably be dead within 5 years. He's probably right. The idea that the trees that will need to be replanted may take decades to produce the same shade, I don't believe that they would. They'll produce the same shade much faster than that, but the point is those trees won't be there in decades. They won't last this decade. So the time to replant trees and plant more trees is now, to make sure we can replace that before it's lost. Same with the Douglas fir. A Douglas fir on its own is a dead tree. That tree's death warrant was signed 50 years ago when these properties, single-family residential zone, were built and the forest was demolished. The Douglas fir, his time is up. The time to say no to having increased density in an urban containment zone was a generation ago. The time to say no to this kind of development pattern that would have stopped global warming issues that we're having to deal with all throughout this evening was a generation ago. Last time there was an oil crisis and everybody was encouraged to conserve oil and then didn't. And then it happened again this summer and we didn't. We're just doing again, and we're gonna push it down the line. And so this is what happens when people had an opportunity to say no a generation ago and didn't. The decisions get harder every time, and saying no now won't stop the issues that we're having to deal with. Homelessness, the lack of healthy homes that we have because of the way we have built and the heating in our atmosphere. And we have to make the decisions going forward about what we will be saying yes to in order to mitigate things, because we can no longer avoid them because a generation ago people did not say no. And there will be things that we have to say no to now. They're the things that I usually bring up every time about cars, which make me very unpopular. And that's why nobody said no 25 years ago. You'll know that it's a thing you need to say no to now because it's going to be unpopular. Whereas now, people feel very strongly and very emotionally charged because they're nostalgic about saving the trees, because that's the thing that no longer matters. Oh my goodness, it is an election year. Listen to our soapboxes. I will move to Councillor Garnett for a second time.
Thank
And
you,
then
Chair.
Councillor Fallon.
2 points. One, as far as process goes, staff did give us another recommendation to redesign to protect the trees, so that's would have fallen within the process. As far as some of the comments from my colleagues, I've been pretty consistent in my time in 4 years about trees. I think it's nothing new. And quite frankly, I find some of the comments were actually out of order. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Just to clarify that although I have some passion and perhaps some emotion with certain decisions, my rationale I spoke to the last time this was presented, it is we were told that these are family homes, and it was reiterated this evening. And I see that the 2 bedrooms upstairs and the 2 floors down of the 3rd bedroom, for families, if they're having, anyhow, I won't get into it. The 3rd bedroom is down 2 floors away from the master bedroom. I have difficulties with that under my definition of a family home. I think that doesn't work for me. I also spoke regarding the trees, and I wish that for it to be a smaller lot coverage. And as far as trees on the boulevard, why does it have to be an either or? Why can't we have trees on the property and trees on the boulevard? And lastly, I think to suggest that comments are about political posturing is inappropriate and just disrespectful to that whole, to the position. And to just make sure that things are really clear, I will not be seeking re-election, so there was no political posturing on my part. Thank you.
Thank you. Did anyone else wish to speak for a second time before I'll call the question? No, or third time. Okay. I will call the question on the recommendation that development permit application goes forward to the Advisory Planning Commission. All in favor? See 5 in favor. Those opposed? See 2 opposed. Councillors Garnett and Councillors Fowlett. The motion carries. Moving on to the next item of the agenda. Section 7, adoption of the minutes. We have the minutes from the regular council meeting, and there is a recommendation.
Move adoption.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Is there any just comments, edits? No? Okay, I will call the question. All in favor? Moved unanimously. Section 8, business. We do not have any business not completed at a previous meeting. We have no rise and report from in-camera minutes. I believe there's no mayor's report today. And for councillors' reports, there is only mine, which is a brief verbal report on the Regional Water Supply Commission. We had recently approved the Regional Water Supply Commission, the 30-year master plan to go out to public comment. It did so. That was closed. We had 753 visits to the website. And 22 written comments that actually came in on the water supply. Many of them actually where people had really downloaded it and read through it and given quite detailed comments. You know, there was 5 general themes. Generally, the region is supportive of the addition of the filtration, which turned out to be a very contentious issue amongst the commissioners themselves, just due to the cost. That's a $1 billion treatment plant that we're looking at in the next 10 years that would be started in 2027. Support for local food security and maintaining our water supply for that. Some concern with our rate structures, particularly agricultural. One of the things that we got was a letter from the Malahat Nation who would like more time to provide feedback. The commission in the end approved the plan without waiting for their letter. However, we have said that we would, when we did receive that letter, we would receive it to the commission and take that into consideration as that went forward. One of the commissioners had requested that because it is not currently a requirement for Island Health for us to have filtration, that before we actually pulled the trigger on such a large expenditure, we actually get a letter from Island Health requiring that sort of thing, and there was some coverage of that in the Times Colonist. If anybody had questions about that water treatment or about that plan, I could take those, but otherwise I don't believe we need to receive my verbal report. So I can just move on to the committee reports. And we have notes from, or minutes from the August 8th Committee of the Whole meeting, and I will turn to Councillor Wainwright, who is the chair.
Thank you, Chair. I'll move that the minutes be received.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. All in favor? Okay, that's unanimous.
Okay. There were 3 recommendations from committee. The first one is with respect to a development permit and development variance application at 9824 5th Street. It was recommended by committee, and I so move that development permit application number DP 100837 and development variance permit application number DV 100322 at 9824 5th Street be forwarded to the Advisory Planning Commission for further review and comment.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Do we have any discussion? Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. I'll just, I guess, reiterate that I'm not completely comfortable with this. However, I'm willing to see it go through to APC and see what comments they have. If we ultimately do approve it, I think it's worth, we had talked about perhaps covenants on the property, which the neighboring automotive business had mentioned concerns about noise and vibrations. I think that might be something worth considering. I don't know if that's something APC would discuss or not. And for now, I'll just leave it at that, and we'll see what they come back with. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak? No? All right, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Okay, I think that's unanimous.
The next recommendation was with respect to a development variance application at 9844 3rd Street with respect to a sign. It was recommended by committee, and I so move that development variance permit application number DV 100321 to display a fascia sign displaying the business name be rejected.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Seeing none, I guess we'll just point out that in that recommendation, there's a typo in there. The 100 appears twice. And I will call the question. All those in favor?
And the final recommendation from committee, and I so move that staff bring forward an amendment to the sign bylaw that would allow residential building naming in sign district C, downtown commercial.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Go ahead, Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Just a question or clarification through you to staff. When we had this discussion last time, the concern was about developers putting their names on building. We were okay for it to be called the Cameo Building, but there was concern about developers putting their name on that. So is the wording that we're providing, is it specific enough to it's a little bit general, so that we're saying they can have naming, but we haven't specifically said developers can't put their name on there. So I don't know if that needs clarity or.
Through the chair to Councillor O'Keefe, I think it's very clear from a staff perspective. We
Okay.
understand. It's pretty clear.
Okay,
Thank you.
okay, thanks.
Thank you. No further comments? I will call the question. All in favor? Okay. I believe Mayor McNeil-Smith was in favor. It was a delay. That's unanimous then. And those are all three of the recommendations that were with the Committee of the Whole report. I'll move on to staff reports. We have three. The first one is movie in the park, and I will turn to staff for an introduction.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Council. This report is a result of getting an application from the Sydney BIA and Mary Winspear Center, where they would like to organize and host a community event for called Movie in the Park at Iroquois Park. And the report brings forward a bit of detail on that. And as a result of the request, they have amplification for the event, and this report is seeking approval from Council on application for this event. I'd be happy to answer any other questions.
All right. Does anyone have questions for staff? Councillor Fallett.
Thank you. Through you to staff. Mr. DeMayor, do we happen to know what the movie is that they want to show?
Through the chair, Councillor Fallett, I'm not aware at this point what they're going to be showing at this point.
Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further comments or questions, I will.
I'll move the recommendation that the use of amplification during the Movie in the Park event at Iroquois Park on August 27th, 2022 be approved.
Second.
All right. Further discussion? Okay, seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Okay, that's unanimous. The semi-annual variance report. I'll look to staff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is the first of three regular financial reports to Council, and this one covers just over the first half of this current year. So there are 30 different notes covering the operating budget and over 40 for capital. So I will not be getting into more detail here on any specific items, but like always, we are open for questions. There are 2 points I would like to highlight. One is the the impact that fuel prices have had so far on the operating budgets. And as indicated, these have largely been offset thus far, but we'll have a closer look at these after the third quarter. The other item is the RCMP contract, which has been a long-standing source of operating savings over the years, but we don't think it will be this year, as last year's contract settlement has resulted in a bill for last fiscal where we normally receive a credit. And this will likely mean that we will have to use some of the budgeted surplus to balance the budget at year end. With that, I'll open it up to any questions, please.
All right, I'll look for any questions for staff. Councillor O'Keefe, go ahead.
Thank you. Just one, I think. Just in regards to the motor vehicles, driver services. And my question is, I'm just wondering is, if, knowing that ICBC is putting more of their services online for renewals and stuff, do we anticipate that that will have any impact on our revenues at all? And I'm not sure what percentage of our revenues from driver services comes from ICBC renewals and that sort of thing.
More of our revenue comes from the driver services side, because there are many other options in town for insurance.
Okay.
So it's a little too early to tell what the overall impact of that might be down the road, but it's an incredibly busy little office.
Yeah, okay, that's good. Thank you.
Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Chair. Just to point out, and I don't know if staff can comment, but I thought it was interesting, point 9 on fire protection, that call volume continues to be 30% above historical norms. And I guess, I think I would have understood that in the context of the previous fiscal year, and to look at this in the first 6 months of this fiscal reporting period, it somewhat surprised me that the call volume had remained so high. I think it's a good bellwether for council as we look to fire services in terms of the future of the town. And I don't know if staff would be comfortable in the absence of the chief commenting on that 30% increase in terms of any. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize Chief Mickelson was here. Chief, if you could comment in terms of what you attribute to that very high volume increase.
Good evening, and through the chair to Councillor Rintoul. Before COVID, we were definitely trending upwards, but definitely now in this somewhat, as we return to normalcy in a kind of a post-COVID environment, everyone seems to be getting back to norms in respect to being out and about, and the call volume has been consistent day over day, basically, well, pretty much since the beginning of the year, the easing of restrictions. So we're trending for well over 1,000 emergency responses this year, which is at least 25 to 30%, greater than the historical norms, or at least 20% greater than kind of our busiest year in the past. So it's a 6-month snapshot, and we kind of hope things slow down a little bit, but this year has been very, very busy, and the call types have been fairly evenly spread out. There hasn't been any one particular call type being medical, rescue, or fire. It's been fairly well distributed amongst those different incident types. Without question, the struggles the provincial ambulance service is having is impacting us and resulting in an increased pressures on the department, but not in an extraordinary fashion. We're still seeing considerable spikes in calls for other services we provide as well.
Thank you, Chief. I think it's an interesting that was interesting feedback from you, and thanks to you and your crew for keeping pace, and something that council will have to monitor as we look to future budget cycles. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chief. Councillor Garnett, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. 3 questions. With regards to common services and the increase in volume of public notifications as part of the OCP in terms of the extra cost, I'm just wondering, was that not something we might have budgeted for through the OCP process, or is that something that we just didn't anticipate there would be that extra amount?
Just in general, there are far more notifications mailed out than there used to be a number of years ago. So it is hard to really anticipate the postage volumes.
Thank you. Second question with regards to the comprehensive sewer rate review, and mentioning that it's on hold due to staffing constraints. Do we have any kind of indication of when that might proceed at this time, or are we still sort of in a holding pattern and not sure when?
It's highly unlikely it'll proceed this year. We are aiming for 2023.
Okay, thank you. And one last question you may or may not know the answer to. As far as tree appreciation days go, it's calling for Ray Creek Park. Do we know the specific area where they're targeting? Maybe Mr. Demare
I'll
knows
let
that one.
Miss Clary respond to that if she is willing.
Through to Councillor Garnett, I'm not 100% sure. I know they're doing some ivy pulls first, the weekend or two before, and then they're planting some like sapling type size trees the following weekend. But I'm not sure on the exact location in Ray Creek Park.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Is there any further questions for staff? All right, seeing none, I will.
Move receipt.
Thank you.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All right, seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Okay, that's unanimous. We'll go on to the relocation of the long-term pay parking lot, and I'll look to staff for a report.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. Tonight we're seeking council confirmation that Lot F is to be the new location of the long-term paid parking lot. As we all know, we have to stop using Lot A for that purpose, as it's no longer permitted under our lease with the province. There will be a slight reduction in the number of available spaces from 42 to 32, and we are recommending that a limit be placed on the number of monthly parking passes sold, that being 15 in the high season and 20 at other times. And I do understand from the operator that preference will be given to existing monthly business customers when they start selling those monthly passes at Lot F. So people like the ones we heard from tonight are more likely to be accommodated. We are also recommending an increase in the cost of monthly passes for this lot only, and point out that monthly passes are available at most of the town-owned lots. So it's not just a question of having to move to the employee parking lot. There are other lots, and this one is 1 block away from Lot A.
Thank you. Are there any questions for staff? Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you, Chair. Through you to staff. Do we have any formal policy that guides us in regards to the percentage of spaces that we allocate to long-term parking?
A formal policy, no, because every lot has a different number of spaces. We don't apply a percentage. It's just up to 20 in most lots.
Okay. Yeah, I was just surprised at the number of spaces that we provide to long-term parking. And then just one other question I had, in regards to the parking study, question through you to staff. Will that parking study include a parking demand or utilization study? I know you listed what it's going to have in it, but I didn't know if that meant also figuring out how much are the street spaces being utilized, like different times of day, that sort of thing.
That is absolutely within the scope.
Okay.
And we might not have articulated it clear enough, but we did try and indicate what
Okay.
would be within scope. And
Right. Okay, that's great. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Rinchel?
Thank you, Chair. Through to staff, and forgive me if it's in here and I've missed a specific number, but looking at page 2 of the report, the second paragraph indicates that in anticipation of the conversion, the town has stopped selling monthly parking passes for Lot F. And so these monthly parking passes are, I take it, local businesses who use this lot for daytime parking mainly, and in unreserved spots. So it's, I guess, subject to availability as opposed to any sort of reserved parking scenario. How many of those type monthly parking passes have been available in Lot F previously?
I believe 20 have been available at F. Not to say that very rarely are all available monthly passes sold, and certainly there's a much higher demand for them in the high season, and it tails off considerably in the winter.
But is it a fair characterization that currently in Lot F, the pass holders tend to be people who work in town and use that for their regular parking lot while they're at work?
That is most likely the case, although we tend not to ask our customers the purpose for buying a monthly pass. And typically, sometimes we just know the people from the regular purchase of the passes, but it's not something we make a point of asking.
Yeah, okay, but I guess we know, yeah, I'm gonna continue to hold the assumption that the majority of them are business people parking there. So that is an element of my ongoing concern, that currently, if there's about 20 people using monthly passes there, and this is proposing up to 20 monthly parking passes be available in Lot F for part of the year and 15 through the other part of the year, then people who are parking in Lot A currently may well be unlikely to get one of those passes. So, for example, the group that came and expressed concern tonight, and you mentioned they may have some success getting passes, but we're not adding any capacity to Lot F in terms of what we already experience with monthly pass holders, is what I'm hearing from staff. Is that correct?
Well, we do have a recommendation with respect to the number of monthly passes, and council is free to vary that if they wish. But it is always a balancing act between regular monthly parkers and ad hoc parkers. Businesses benefit from both. For employee parking for the monthly passes, and for their customers, it's the turnover that we look for.
Thank you, and I just can't help but wonder if, we're opening up Lot A for those, shoppers, people visiting the town for free 3-hour parking. And I hope it continues to be clear to the community that we have no choice. We can't be charging for parking in Lot A any longer. So this is necessitated through the stipulation the landlord has made on the town, and that's the province. But so that I can't help but wonder if we maybe shouldn't be allocating more of Lot F towards these monthly parking passes, knowing that we've added capacity to the 3-hour free parking in Lot A. So I'll leave that potential observation there, and I'll listen to what other councillors perhaps think on the subject. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Wainwright?
Thank you, Chair. So I think this is going to be a bit of a challenging discussion, but the starting point, I think, is simple. I think we're probably all on board that Lot F is the appropriate alternative, and we might get that motion out of the way and then start talking about what happens with monthly passes. And if that's a reasonable thing to do, I will float that first motion, and then I'll make a proposal about monthly passes. So I'll move that parking lot F at Third and Bevan be selected as the alternate location of the town's long-term paved parking lot.
Second.
Okay, it's moved and seconded. Does anyone have discussion on that part one of that recommendation? Okay, seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Okay, that's unanimous. So continue, Councillor Renier.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So, to me, I respect the historical use and the needs of some of our downtown businesses for parking for more than a 3-hour term somewhere in our downtown. And my thinking is that we should limit the monthly parking passes in Lot F to members of the BIA, so that we are not making any of them available to condo residents, and we wouldn't make them available to tourists either. I don't see why a tourist would need a monthly pass. They're not likely to want to pay for that length. If they do want to stay a month, they can actually pay for a month. A monthly pass basically just gives you a discount. It doesn't guarantee you a space. The condo owners, if they want to park there for long term, can pay to park there for long term. Would not be encouraging it by offering a discount for monthly pass. And I don't think we should be selling long-term monthly passes, as in annual, either. I don't think we're in the business of offering discount parking. So my proposal would be that up to, and I'll make this as a motion, that up to 20 monthly parking passes be made available at Lot F to BIA members. That's
Do
it.
I have a seconder?
I'll second for discussion.
All right. Discussion. Councillor Wainwright, would you like to motivate further?
I think I've already kind of made my point, so I'll listen to my colleagues.
Councillor Rintoul is the seconder. I'll let you comment first, if you'd like.
Thank you. I seconded for discussion. I like the direction of Councillor Wainwright's suggestion. I'd like to ask through to staff, if I may, the practicality of, I guess, vetting and confirming that an applicant is an employee of a member SBIA organization to get staff's degree of comfort level with what's suggested in the motion. And then following that, I'd like to speak to that number of 20 and may recommend an amendment to that number.
The operator would be willing to follow whatever directions we provide. It can't be ironclad, obviously, because what's to stop somebody from using a BIA member to buy them a pass? But to the degree possible, we can pass on that message and see how it works.
Thank you. I like that element of the motion, noting, as Councillor Wainwright has, that it's people that work in the town, like those who came from the medical clinic this evening, that we hope to be able to accommodate to do their work in Sydney. I would continue to have a concern with the number 20, simply because that's what staff have acknowledged we do now in that lot, and we're moving the traffic from Lot A over to Lot F, and so my preference, and I'll hear other councillors speak first, but I would intend to move an amendment to increase that number from 20 higher, but I'll leave my comments there for this point. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I believe I have Councillor O'Keefe first and then Mayor McNeil-Smith.
Thank you. So I guess I'll start off with, I think I generally support the direction of limiting the passes to SBIA members. However, I guess what I still find problematic is that we are providing long-term parking to businesses and employees in the downtown core in the first place. I mean, the town and taxpayers invested a significant amount of money in the employee parking lot at Mary Winspear. And the whole issue with that was there's a lack of downtown parking. If, and this was supported by the SBIA, that if we provided them with free parking, it was just a short walk down to the waterfront. And so it wasn't seen to be an issue at that time. So I don't even think we have provided parking at Mary Winspear at great expense, at taxpayers' expense. And now that we would use up more of our spaces downtown for that purpose, I can't justify that. What I hear from the business community is frustration with parking because it costs them customers, so that people are driving around the block trying to find places where they can park to go and do business. So I think that we should be focusing more of our parking in our lots on those interim spaces. So for people who are coming downtown to go to the shops, take advantage of our restaurants and coffee shops and do their business in Sydney, I'm more concerned about that. That's what is driving our economy. Also, what I would call the midterm users, I guess. So those people that need some parking, say for 1 to 5 days because they're going over to Sydney Spit or something like that. So in terms of expanding to allow more long-term space, I wouldn't support that. I'll support, 20 in Lot F. That kind of seems what we have already, but it would be a stretch for me to support anything more than that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor McNeil-Smith, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I'm supportive of the motion and thank Councillor Wainwright for bringing it forward. I think it's an appropriate motion. I have a question through to staff. If they could just provide further clarification on the number of passes. My recollection was that in parking lots F and C, and I'm forgetting all of the letters, but our lots, that the actual number of passes, monthly passes, was in the number of 6 to 8 in each of those parking lots. And I thought we actually had a percentage. Did we not have a percentage cap on the number of spaces in each of the lots, given that they are different sizes?
I'm not aware of any percentage policy ever been set. We have reported in the past on the number of monthly parking passes actually sold, but not so much on the number available. So maybe that's where the discrepancy comes.
Just for clarification again, we've actually had upwards of 20 monthly parking pass requests in Lot F.
I can't give you the exact statistics. These are the kinds of things that would be good to do some research on ahead of the meeting, but I can look back and see where the peaks might have been in past years for some of our prime lots.
Thank you. I'm supportive of this motion.
Okay, Councillor Fowler, go ahead.
Thank you. Councillor O'Keefe raised some very interesting points in regards to spots being made available to the BIA. I think that or BIA members, I think that's wrong. We built a parking lot for our downtown employees, and to now say, well, okay, we've got a few extra ones here for members of the BIA. I think that is absolutely wrong. At the same time, our BIA members, our business members, are saying there's not enough parking for customers. And this evening, when we heard from the one speaker speaking to a business down on the waterfront area, they talked about convenience and the length of the walk. There was no other reason. They were talking about convenience. And yet, if they were working in a mall, they would be walking a very similar distance as from the Mary Winspear down to the waterfront. So I cannot support the motion if we are setting aside monthly parking passes for BIA members. I just, I think we're going in the wrong direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Garnett, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to staff, this may be a tricky question to answer, but would the employee parking lot as it presently sits be able to accommodate the vast majority of employees in the downtown core?
Yeah, you're right, Councillor. That is difficult to address definitively, but it is well used, and to my knowledge, there's still capacity on most days.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Now, I see Councillor Mayor McNeil Smith and Councillors Rintoul who would be speaking for a second time. I think I will speak for a first time before I go to them. I am in favor of the motion for the BIA members, if only because we have not previously discussed not having long-term monthly passes before. And we're kind of just looking at transferring those over. And so I feel the discussion of actually dropping monthly passes for businesses is just kind of taking it a little far for this discussion. So limiting it to the BIA members so that it's businesses and not tourists or condo owners is something we have spoken about before in terms of the proper uses of these long-term, monthly passes, and discouraging people from parking their second car if they bought a condo downtown and things like that. So I'm willing to have that go as kind of that intermediate step. I understand Councillor Wintrool's point about having a higher number that's more in keeping with the existing Lot A. In that case, though, I believe that it would have been to not restrict it to the BIA, and it would have been to make sure that we could have those tourists who are going over to Sydney Spit, because I think that's a really important actual use of that long-term lot, or the long-term passes of that lot. But I guess those are only for a few days. It's not monthly anyway. Councillors Fallett and O'Keefe have raised very salient points regarding the employees and their objections and their requests. And the only thing that gives me pause in saying that those could be something that I would agree with entirely is simply that they were doctors. and one of the things we've hammered over is what we can do as a municipality to encourage healthcare providers. And it turns out they really care about parking because they're very busy health personnel, and they all came here and sat in the chamber because they were so upset about the potential loss of convenience of their parking, and even in fact seemed, and perhaps they just didn't understand that we weren't getting rid of long-term parking, we were simply moving it across the street. Though I share the question, especially when it's our healthcare providers who say that they can't walk 6 blocks, and I do wonder about the message that sends, given that as healthcare professionals they know what the diseases are that plague our society and the general causes. But in this case, I feel that if we did do something to pull the rug out from under our healthcare providers, and if this is a fairly substantial use of those, that it would look like something that Town of Sydney had done to discourage healthcare professionals in town, and I would not like that sort of appearance. So I would support that as that is. And I will go to Councillor Rintoul and then Mayor McNeil Smith second.
Thank you, Chair. I detect that there's likely not the support to increase the number from 20 that's in the motion as currently, so I won't move an amendment to increase it from 20. And in part, I reconcile my position in terms of recognizing that these are not reserved spots, and that those pass holders on occasion are there or may not be there, and it's fluid. I would like to hear, it's part of the parking study, when that advances, I guess a little more feedback on this lot as it becomes known that it is the new monthly pass holder parking lot, what the reality of this is for SBIA users and what the uptake is like. So I think we've got a bit of a test period, and if we determine, just based on demand, that 20 isn't enough, there's an opportunity, I think, in the future, of course, to revisit that. And to Councillor Duncan's comments, absolutely right. What can municipalities do in our purview to assist healthcare workers? And we heard from them, and you're right, they showed up and came to speak to this out of concern that a physician may be on call at the hospital and trying to do his hours here in Sydney, and I think we want to accommodate when possible, and we can with the motion that's on the floor. So I'll definitely support the motions before us. Thank you.
Mayor McNeil-Smith? And then Councillor Wainwright?
Thank you, Chair. I just want to provide some historical context. As a downtown business owner for the past 22 years, the parking spaces that were made available for parking passes over 22 years ago in each of our town lots was meeting a demand for employees who needed close access to their businesses or the nature of their jobs, and a number of other circumstances. I'll disclose that I don't use any of the town parking lots, that I pay for parking spaces in a private Anavet's parking lot for my employees. It's a necessity, for example, and I won't give all of the examples, but or give two examples. One is I have a mobility challenged employee. This mobility challenged employee cannot walk from the Mary Winspear lot to 4th Street in either direction. And businesses have a need to move things to and from their businesses with some reliability. And thus they make use of these passes. They've made use of these passes in excess of 22 years. And it was my understanding that it was a smaller number of our town parking lots that these passes were allocated. We've heard from the physicians, the healthcare staff this evening, that is another need. I would turn to staff if they could confirm my recollection, having participated in the 2007 OCP, that it was a longer term plan for us to have a parking lot at either end of town, at the Mary Winspear end of town and at the waterfront end of town. And fortunately in 2010, the council that I was fortunate to be a part of was able to make Lot A serve in a capacity for both visitors, short-term visitors, long-term visitors, and employees. But perhaps staff can comment. But this is a long-term need, and I don't think that a long laundry list of what the requirements for business are. If we have a significant number of businesses who have 100% lot coverage of either the premises that they lease or the premises that they own, and can't provide parking, significant number of staff working in downtown, and there are the variety of needs, and I think there is a balance. All of the 275 operating businesses in the downtown, whether they're a health practice, whether they're a retailer, whether they're a service business, whether they're accommodation, appreciate that we want to have as much of the parking available downtown, whether it's on street or in our parking lots, available for our patrons. And again, it's finding a balance between the owners and employees of businesses and the patrons and visitors. I'll just add a last comment that, when the employee parking lot was built at Mary Winspear Centre, we're fully aware that it was impractical to put in place that employees would have to show identification to park for free in that, and that patrons to businesses are free, and patrons do park in that space. So I think it's overall a good balance that we're moving forward with now, and I think we can refine it through the next traffic and parking study that is done through the latter part of this year. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Did I have any further? It was Councillor Raynard again, yep.
Thank you, Chair. So, I guess the point I'd emphasize about these monthly parking passes is they don't give you a right to a parking space. So if you're an employee that, basically you're trying to get to the parking lot early in the morning so you can get a space. And then if you have to leave to go somewhere else, be it a hospital round or a meeting or whatever, when you come back, the odds are fairly high that there will not be a space, because our parking lots are busy. These monthly passes really are a discount. They're, you know, so you don't have to pay the full fee every time. And they're also a benefit you can give your employees, because you could buy them parking passes. And that's what we were hearing from some of the people working at the medical clinics, that they had been given these parking passes. So I can see how they might be potentially upset about no longer having a parking pass because of something the town did. But this all kind of goes round to, I would emphasize that these parking passes are giving people who buy them a discount. And there is no need for the town to be doing that at all. In the long term, I'd encourage council to think about getting rid of the monthly passes, because the parking would still be there, people would still be paying for it, they just would not get a discount by buying a year's worth of parking pass at a time. And I don't see why we need to give them that discount. So I think the motion that's being proposed is not a bad interim step. It reduces the number of people who can get parking passes in this one lot. I think the number is not unreasonable, because some parking passes that were previously held by residents will be available for businesses instead. And I think the comments about the concerns expressed about employee parking are quite reasonable, but I think maybe the way to address it is get rid of the monthly passes over time. Anyway, thank you.
Great, thank you. Oh, Councillor O'Keefe, go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to comment on Councillor Wainwright's suggestion about getting rid of the monthly passes. I think that's a good idea. When we get to the next recommendation, I guess I'll speak to that then in terms of the cost. But in the meantime, I'm still happy to let this go forward. I think it's kind of an interim thing for now. I'll look forward to when we get the parking study in the new year and kind of revisit this along with that other sort of the whole ball of wax all at once. And I think that would be a good time to revisit whether we're going to provide monthly parking passes or not. And so I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Thank you. So if there's any further discussion, or shall I just call a question? All right. I will call a question on 20 monthly parking passes made available in Lot F to members of the BIA. All in favor? Okay, I see 6. All opposed? Councillor Fallot? Motion carries. And I'll look for the last motion, last recommendation. Go ahead, Councillor O'Keefe.
Okay, I'll do this. I'll see if this flies. That the monthly parking rate be increased to $100 for Lot F, period.
Would anybody like to second?
Second.
Okay, so moved and seconded. Would you like to motivate?
Sure. As Councillor Wainwright alluded to earlier, and I just don't believe that we should be sort of subsidizing or allowing a decrease in parking rates just because they do it for more than 3 months. It costs us a lot of money to maintain those lots, so I think it's reasonable that we should have funds to cover that off based on the extraordinary demand that there is for those spaces. It seems to me that the maximum amount is reasonable. Usually you offer people a discount, when you want them to buy more stuff or get more things, or you want their business. We don't need to do that. There's a huge demand for these. And, you know, if we're trying to discourage car use and encourage active transportation, it doesn't seem right to me that we would offer a reduced rate to encourage people to use their car more. So I think we should just say it's $100 and there's no discount just because they have a pass for 3 months.
Thank you. Mayor McNeil-Smith? Oh, actually, I'm sorry, I should turn to Council Powell first. Oh, all right, Mayor McNeil-Smith.
Thank you, Chair. If you could go on to the next speaker and come back to me, thank you.
Councilor Rintoul.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think I like the recommendation that is before us, and I say that because I don't have a lot of expertise in this area to know that increasing it to, you know, $100 across the board is in keeping with the market, and there is a market. You know, I pay for a parking spot associated with my office, and I pay less than what is being proposed in the motion that's before us, which leads me to believe that the $70 that staff are proposing is in keeping with that market and what is being charged elsewhere for parking. I agree it's not our business, but I have also stated, and I know Councillor Keith noted as well, that there's an opportunity for us when the parking study comes before council to kind of revisit this in a more fulsome manner, and I hope with more information in front of us to be able to make decisions like this, because to me this kind of feels like rolling the dice and here's a number. You know, I understand that the $100, if less than 3 months being purchased is proposed here, and I think that's an administrative burden. So I understand what's on the recommendation, and my preference would be to support what staff have put forward here under recommendation 3. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mayor McNeil-Smith, are you able to speak?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll support this motion. I believe the current rate at parking lot F on a daily basis, if you have to pay on a daily basis, or if you choose to pay the maximum 31 days times the rate, is $7 per day, which would be $210 for 30 days. And so I think, but to Councillor Rintoul's point, there is a market rate for spaces paid for on a monthly basis, and hence my question through you, Chair, to staff. Would it be fair to say that Robbins has set the various rates that are currently at parking lot F? That is, there is an hourly rate, there's a 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. rate, there's an overnight rate, and there's the daily rate of, I believe, $7. Are those rates that Robbins has set? And did we staff seek guidance from Robbins on the increase from $50 to $70 or 100?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The rates were set by the town in consultation with Robbins, and the recommendation tonight is based on the expert advice from Robbins Parking.
Thank you, Mr. Hisik. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Councilor Wainwright, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just looking in the report in the paragraph on financial implications on page 3, and it says that it's being recommended that the rates for monthly parking at Lot F only be increased from 50 to 70 if 3 months or more are purchased, and from 75 to 100 if less than 3 months. So that kind of sounds like it's currently 75 for a month. And the motion to increase it to 70, it's 70 if it's 3 months or more. So if our preference is looking for them to only go for 1 month, and my understanding from the staff report is the current fee for 1 month is $75. And if staff could correct me if there's a mistake in what I'm reading.
The staff report is correct with respect to what the rates currently are. It's $50 per month if 3 or more are purchased, and $75 on a month-to-month basis.
Right.
So part of the reason for encouraging multiple month purchases, it provides certainty to the purchaser for one thing, and obviously it is easier to administer.
I can appreciate. I guess the concern I was having is the motion as worded. Sorry, the not Councillor O'Keefe's motion. The motion in the agenda package suggests that we increase it to $70. But in fact, if it's only a 1 month pass, $70 is less than we're currently charging. So I think, yeah, Councillor O'Keefe's motion of setting it 100 is a modest increase for the 1 month fee. It is a significant increase if it's a 3 month or a 12-month pass, but I'm hoping that we're going to stop handing those out.
Go ahead, Mr. Hisik.
Just to clarify, the staff report does say 70 for Lot F, or 100 if less than 3 months purchased at a time. So Councillor O'Keefe's motion was to eliminate the 70 option and just make it a flat 100, regardless of how many months are purchased.
Councillor O'Keefe, go ahead.
Thank you, and I just, I think Mayor McNeil Smith commented on it, but I just wanted to remind council that the daily rate is $7 a day, and so that would be $210 a month. So in terms of whether the amount is excessive or not, I mean, they're still getting half. It's still half price what they would normally pay anyways.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Right, I'm torn on this one. On the one hand, Robbins and staff kind of worked out what they thought was a reasonable cost, and as Councillor Rintoul brought up, there's a market for this, and so presumably they set it based on that. On the other hand, it does sound like the $100 across the board is reasonable, but I don't feel strongly enough about that the rate for, 3 or more months, that purchasing 3 or 4 months at a time needs to go up at this point. There wasn't a financial reason given for having to raise more fees for this lot at this time, that having the rate go up, at the step that staff has already proposed. I think I would just stick with staff's motion, not having a compelling reason to increase the rates across the board at this time. That being said, I will call the question on Councillor O'Keefe's motion to increase the rates to $100. Oh, sorry, Councillor McNeil or Mayor McNeil Smith, further comment.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I just need a clarity on the intention of the mover, Councillor O'Keefe. Is the intention to remove having a reduced rate for X number of months? And the third staff recommendation which came from Robin's expertise, and but is that the intention, so that it will be $100 a month for however many months? And to this point, we have not discussed putting a limit on number of months.
So, yes, so my intention with it is it's just it's $100 across the board. So whether they bought it just on a monthly basis, whether they bought it for 3 months, it would be $100. It didn't seem, I didn't have in my mind a compelling reason why it shouldn't be. So that's my motion. And in terms of the amount, $100 was mentioned if less than 3 months are purchased at one time. So it's just putting $100 out there as the same amount for everybody.
Thank you for the clarification. A question through you, Chair, to staff is, are we aware of what's Robbins Parking's limit is on number of months that can be purchased at a time?
I am not aware of any limit they place. Recently, they've been going month to month, but in a typical year, they might offer a full year at a time. I'm not certain. One thing I might be able to add is that the monthly rate at all other town lots is 50. So going from 50 to 100 would seem a bit harsh, especially if we're looking to take care of a certain cohort at that lot. And I think another reason they provide the lower rate for the multiple month purchase is that tends to focus on the regular business users as opposed to the ad hoc person looking for just 1 month here and there.
Thank you, Mr. Hissick. And my comments will be that I'm sorry I misunderstood the intent of the motion, even though I'm sure it may have been clear to everyone else. I support the staff recommendation until such time as we conclude the parking study that will soon be underway and come to council early next year. I think I was going to raise the point, Mr. Hissick, that we're currently charging $50 at our other lots. And well, I appreciate Councillor O'Keefe made reference to me bringing the daily rate in calculation of $200 a month. I also mentioned that there is a market rate. And I think we have to be aware of what the rate is at our other town lots, as well as the general market rate. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Garnett?
Thank you, Chair. Through you to staff. So you mentioned $50 at most of the other lots. So are we anticipating that we're going to raise those rates similar to reflect what you're proposing for Lot F?
I was going to ask a couple of follow-up questions. One of them was going to be that would council like staff to bring back a proposed rate review for all town lots? And the other, while I've got the floor, is going back to the previous motion, would council be looking to keep it at 20 passes a month in the high season as well, as would you want that reduced to a lower number during the summer months?
The motion I made didn't have any change at different times of the year.
That was my understanding as well, that the difference was the insertion of the parking passes be for the BAA and then reduced to 15 for the months of May similarly, as the current wording of the motion is? Or it was not moved at all? Okay, so we're still needing a motion on that? On whether we reduce it, or we're just not gonna? So it looks like, we, by omission, we did not reduce to 15 for the months of May through September, so it's 20 through all month. It seems to be the common understanding council had. And to your first question about
would council like us to look at raising rates for the other town lots in the coming months?
If I may, Chair, my suggestion would be, we're having this discussion because of the urgency around Lot A and Lot F, so I think this is appropriate, what's proposed in the staff report. But if we're going to start visiting the other lots, I suggest we do it in conjunction with the parking study. Gives us an opportunity to revisit this as well. So my thought would be leave it, and we call the question on what's here.
Councillor Wainwright.
I was going to say, we have a motion on the floor and we should deal with that.
I agree. Okay, so the motion on the floor was Councillor O'Keefe's motion with the $100 across the board. All in favor? See 1, 2 in favor. All opposed? 5 opposed. Mayor McNeil-Smith, Councillor Garnett, myself, Councillor Wainwright, Councillor Rintoul. The motion fails. Would somebody like to make an alternate motion?
I'll move that the monthly parking rate be increased to $70 for Lot F and $100 if less than 3 months purchased at a time.
Second.
Do we have any further discussion on that? Does not look so. I will call the question. All in favor? Okay, 5 in favor, all opposed? Councillor Follett, Councillor O'Keefe, the motion passes. Do we have any further motions to make potentially with regard to direction for staff, or should we just give them, go ahead, Councillor O'Keefe.
To Mr. Hissick's point about rate review, so perhaps I'll try this motion that staff conduct a rate review for all town lots and bring that forward at the time of the parking study, if that sounds reasonable.
Second.
Okay. Do you have anything further to say, mover, seconder on that? No. Does anyone have further discussion? I guess staff, did you want to comment on whether that sounded reasonable to bring forward as part of the parking study? Thumbs up. All right, I'll call the question. All in favor? Okay, that looked unanimous. And so, unless anyone had further recommendations to bring forward, we will move on to Beacon Avenue Roundabout. All right. Sorry, just trying to go back to the main page of the agenda here. All right. Beacon Avenue West Roundabout Cost Sharing Agreement update. Staff like to give an introduction.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, as you'll recall, Council previously approved in principle a cost-sharing agreement between the town, BAA, and North Saanich for the roundabout. North Saanich approved it at their end, but it has not yet been executed. Discussions have been ongoing regarding an amendment to the agreement to cover potential overages. Design and costing of the project have also been ongoing. Whereas the initial project cost estimate was for just over $5 million, including contingency, the new estimate is just over $5 million plus a smaller contingency. So cost impacts have included construction cost escalations, as well as a more detailed engineering design that has led to a larger than anticipated roundabout footprint. We're now seeking a budget increase of $1.4 million, which essentially is to cover the contingency. And the increase is being proposed at the same 40-40-20 cost share that the original agreement was based on, subject to approval of the other partners. There is no change proposed for the town's borrowing, with the additional amount to be internally funded as previously discussed. A grant application was submitted in late June, but we will not hear about the result of that application until early 2023. Roughly around the same time this project would be ready to go to tender. North Saanich is also considering a similar report tonight at their meeting, and depending on the outcomes, discussions on an amended agreement will hopefully conclude soon.
Thank you, Mr. Hissick. So, questions through to staff. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Chair. I'm through you to staff, just seeking clarification on the difference between a Class C estimate and a Class D estimate.
The higher you get from D to C to B to A, the more the design has progressed and the variables have been addressed one by one. So Class C is a little more exact than Class D would be, and it's reflected in the amount of the contingency, which has gone from 35 to 25%. So as they move on to a more detailed design, it should eventually come back as a Class A estimate with more costs firmed up and potentially a smaller contingency. And I'm sure there are engineering types at the council table and on the Zoom meeting that could provide better responses than that.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor O'Keefe, go ahead.
Thank you. Through you to staff. I'm just needing some clarity on page 3 of the report, the paragraph 3rd from the bottom. And so it talks about says, in other words, the project would only proceed if a grant is received, etc. So I'm needing some clarity on what we're saying. That are we getting a sense that a couple of the other partners are not going to proceed unless we receive a grant? I'm just wondering where the questioning.
Well, that is the ultimate fallback for all parties, including the town, so that if we don't get agreement on covering the full amount of the estimated costs, it could become a grant-dependent project. So we hold off on execution until we have additional funding to bring it within approved budgets. But I'm hoping that all goes well tonight at both meetings and we don't have to go there, but that remains a possibility until the project is tendered and the actual costs are known.
Okay. Okay, that's fine. And one more, if I may. So I appreciate the comments about the scope, and so that's kind of been reworked a bit. But it made me wonder about, we've talked about overpass in that area, and I'm not sure how, I don't know that the overpass, it doesn't necessarily fit in, obviously, with this project. And it's a little bit of a distance from the highway. But I guess what I'm wondering is, when they're doing the design and they're looking at the scope, is that something that they're keeping in mind in terms of, I don't know if there's approaches that would be required or space required for a pedestrian overpass at Beacon and Highway 17, that we would kind of need to keep that in the back of our mind while we're redesigning that whole area with the Galaran and Sterling and that whole area.
There has been no consideration at all for the pedestrian overpass, which is completely out of scope, but it's being designed to the best of the engineer's ability at this time to remove some of the impacts on Beacon Avenue West, such as realigning Sterling to remove that that turn that close to the intersection. Having this design finalized will certainly help in the work that the Ministry of Transportation will be doing on potential options for the highway and Beacon. But no, the pedestrian overpass is not something that needs to be accommodated here.
Okay.
In the draft design we had a number of years ago, it would fall completely outside the footprint of these works.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Any further questions for staff?
I'd like to move the recommendation, if I may, Madam Chair.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I'll move that an amendment to the Beacon Avenue West Roundabout Project Cost Sharing Agreement be pursued with the funding partners for an additional $1.4 million in project costs according to the same cost sharing percentages outlined in the initial agreement, and that the budget for the Beacon Avenue West Roundabout project be increased to $6.4 million, with the town's portion of the additional cost to be funded from the Canada Community Building Fund.
Second.
All right. Does anyone have any discussion? Look for the mover and seconder first.
Thank you. So I'll say that as we move through the engineering and the cost estimates and the requirements of each of the three entities involved in this infrastructure piece, the district and our Saanich, the Airport Authority, and the town of Sydney, that I think we would anticipate there to be some changes to the cost of the overall project. In my mind, it's a critical piece of infrastructure. It's a critical piece for all three of those partners, who all feed into the traffic pattern at this location. But it's also very, very critical for the residents. I'm not just talking about the development of future business on airport lands, but residents of Sydney, residents of North Saanich who use that corridor. So I'm happy to continue to support seeing this infrastructure project move forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor O'Keefe, do you have anything to?
Just concur with that, and I guess I'll also comment that it's not a surprise to me that this is coming back, that we have to increase the amount. When you look at what's happening in the rest of the world with supply issues and costs of labor and all sorts of things. So I'm not surprised to see this, and I'm happy that we're seeing it sooner rather than later, and that we can plan for it. And as Councillor Rintoul says, I agree that this is critical infrastructure. The option to just not do it, I just don't think would be a responsible thing to do. So I'm happy to move forward.
Thank you. Councillor Garnett?
Thank you, Chair. I won't support the recommendation. I've been consistent from the start in that I think this should have gone through the alternate approval process. I think it's taxpayer money, and I think they should have had a say. I think they probably would have agreed with it, but I still would have liked to have had them have their voice heard. And for many of the reservations I had at the start, I still have. We started off with a $5 million budget, 35% contingency was built into that. Now it's 25% contingency, and now it's up to 6.4. The shovel hasn't broken ground yet. I anticipate there will be higher costs, much to what Councillor O'Keefe spoke to. What's going on in the world? We have a very fluctuating environment in so many ways. Supply chain issues, labor shortages. Can we even get cement? These are all things that could put pause to things and make costs go up. Interest rates, they're not likely to go down. They're likely to continue to go up. So all these things make me very nervous and cause me to have reservations. And that's why I think it would have been really critical to have the taxpayers on board and saying yes. And they probably would have agreed, as I said, but to have them say, yes, go ahead with this, we're for it. And then if these costs escalate as they are, then I would have felt a lot more comfortable with it. So as it is, I'm going to be consistent in my approach, and I won't support it. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. Does anyone else wish to speak to the motion? No, Councillor Wainwright, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate Councillor Garnett's concerns about the wanting to go to the residents and give them a chance to weigh in on this. The challenge with this, I guess if we had done that, we'd be going back to them again, because now that we sometimes gone by and they have a Class C estimate, the costs have gone up, and likely we would wind up going back to them yet again when we get to Class B and construction. I think given the current construction climate, it's pretty challenging. Even for us around the table, we don't have confidence that the number that we're being asked to approve is the final number. And going out to the community with a request like that would be very challenging. So I appreciate the desire to have the community have an opportunity to weigh in, but I don't think the timing is actually right. And if I was going to be weighing in on it, I'd like to know what North Saanich is doing with the agreement before I had to weigh in. So I think we're just in an area of a great deal of uncertainty, but we have a piece of infrastructure that we know needs to get built. And we have the ability to say no right up to the very end. Hopefully we'll get a grant and it'll be a lot easier. But it is just, given this kind of construction climate, a very difficult situation.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers? I'll speak to it briefly that I understand Councillor Garnett's objections as well. And as Councillor O'Keefe raised the point that in addition to simply, as Councillor Wainwright said, construction costs typically may go up as they get refined, and that's something that public wouldn't necessarily weigh in until later. There's more uncertainty than usual now. This may be our municipality's version of the Mackenzie interchange and what will probably be the Keating flyover. In both of those, they became extremely expensive, incredibly delayed. The Mackenzie interchange wasn't even facing the materials limitations and the construction limitations that we are now, and yet taxpayers still paid for those transportation improvements. And I think we'd be in the same situation now that we're actually building transportation infrastructure that has had a lot of pent-up demand. And the time to say no to that demand was a generation ago, and we didn't. And so until we can physically not actually afford it or build it, it looks like we're going to. There's not much we can do about that. And so I will be supporting this motion right to the end and see whether it even goes. If we have no further comments, I'll call the question. All in favor? Okay, I see 6 in favor, all opposed. Councillor Garnett opposed. The motion carries. Next, I'll move to section 14 of correspondence. We have 3 letters of correspondence. I will go to the first one, CRD's First Nations Relations Communications Framework, and there is a motion. Recommendation.
Move receipt.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Discussion, Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. I'm happy to receive it for receipt, but I'm wondering, a question through you to staff, whether staff had considered whether there might be some elements in here that we might want to take a look at in terms of developing our own communications and engagement strategy with First Nations. I know there's a lot of things in here that don't really pertain specifically to Sydney, but I thought there was some good things in there. Excuse me, like things like using the right communication tools and considerations, and education and awareness. So I guess what I would be perhaps inclined to do is a follow-up motion to refer it to staff if you thought that there might be some useful bits in there.
Go ahead, Mr. Humble.
Yeah, if I can, through the chair to Councillor O'Keefe. Yeah, indeed, there may be some things that are certainly worth looking at as part of this framework document that's been created by the CRD. I think as we move forward with respect to looking at implementation of elements of the OCP, dealing with First Nation elements in terms of looking at establishing an MOU, some type of communication strategy, etc., that we can maybe look to this document when we move forward. I think this is something that we might want to bring forward during our priority setting when we're looking at our strategic plan, potentially in the fall after the elections. So this is something that we can look at then. I think to refer it to staff now to look at elements may be a bit premature, and I think this needs to be a council discussion as well as part of it, rather than staff reporting back on potential elements that we might utilize, because I think we have to really look at what our focus is going to be with respect to the key elements that are contained within the OCP, and have a discussion at the council level.
Okay, well, that's good to hear that. I guess what I think it's a good idea for us to have such a strategy. So I didn't want it to be lost. So if it's something that we can have further discussions then as strategic planning, with the understanding that staff have got this and will use it as a tool to further our own plans, I think I'd be happy with that then. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone have any other questions? All right, further discussion? I'll call the question on the receipt. All in favor? Okay, that's unanimous. Second, municipal consent for bylaw number 4506 Regional Parks Loan Authorization Bylaw number 1, 2022. There's a letter from the CRD and a recommendation from staff. Go ahead, Mayor McNeil-Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to move the recommendation that council consent to the CRD adopting bylaw number 4506, Regional Parks Loan Authorization, bylaw number 1, 2022.
Second.
Okay, Mayor McNeil-Smith, I'll go to you to motivate, discuss.
Yeah, just to speak briefly, this went through the CRD board. This went through the CRD's budgeting process in March of this year, actually started in October of last year, and then finalized by the CRD board in March of this year, and now moving forward with implementing the new policy. Happy to answer any questions that the directors might have with regards to how CRD got to this further to what the information provided in the report.
No questions? Councillor O'Keefe, go ahead.
Thank you. Through Mayor McNeil-Smith. Sorry, it may have been covered earlier. So this is for purchase of a particular parcel of land, as I understand it, or just for future acquisitions?
Yes, through you, Chair, to Councillor O'Keefe. Thank you for the question. Yes, no, this is a 5-year policy as part of the 5-year plan to authorize borrowing a maximum of $5 million a year for parks acquisitions. To give a bit of context, CRD began a new service for parks acquisition approximately the year 2000. That is collected from each residence on an annual basis. That's allowed CRD parks to grow to what is approximately 13,000 hectares of regional parkland, along with the 3 regional trails. And several $1 million are spent and approved by the CRD board for additional park acquisitions. There is a very thorough process that CRD staff go through with regards to the acquiring of new parkland. And there is a lot of experience now over 20 years with those acquisition policies. This is a change, feeling that it's financially prudent to allow not only the acquisition fund, as it indicates in this report, the current acquisition fund, that is money in the bank at the CRD for parks acquisition, is approximately $6 million. And CRD has spent that amount in a given year. It fluctuates from year to year. But the borrowing amount CRD would be limited to $5 million, and the board would have to approve the specific loan authorization along with approving a particular parks purchase along the way. This doesn't grant CRD staff to move forward on parks acquisitions or borrowing. It's simply high-level policy at this stage.
Okay, great. Thank you for that.
Any further questions? Okay, seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Okay, that's unanimous. And the last item, the quarterly policing report for April to June 2022, and there is a recommendation from staff.
Move receipt for information.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Okay, seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Okay, that's unanimous. The last is we have packaged correspondence for information to receive all together, and I'll look for a motion.
Move receipt. Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. I'll call the question. Oh, do you have a question? You're just, yep, he's, Councillor Joel is just saying he really supports this motion. I'll call the question. All in favor? Unanimous. The next item on the agenda, there's no notices of motion, no motions to go in camera. I will look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All right, call the question. All in favor? That's unanimous. Good night, everybody. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Chair.